Before we step into tonight's story, take a moment and settle in. This is Haven Stories, a place where the quiet corners of America whisper truths most people choose not to hear. Every week, we bring you tales drawn from real encounters, real places, and real people who walked into the strange and came back changed. If you're someone who feels a pull toward the unexplained, if you've ever sensed that the woods, the highways, the deserts, and the mountains hold more than they show, then you're in the right place. These stories live here, and so do the lessons they leave behind. If you want to help this community grow, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your own experiences, not just to support the channel, but because every story you tell helps someone out there feel a little less alone in what they've seen. Now, take a breath, dim the lights, and follow me into the places most people turn away from. Tonight's story is called The Lights That Walk the Creek Bed. I've always believed that some places remember what people try to forget. And on the night I stepped into that dried-up creek bed in Clay County, Kentucky, I learned that memory has a way of glowing in the dark, quiet, patient, and hungry. My name is Eli Mercer. I'm 43 now, but back then, back in the summer of '98, I was 19 and too stubborn to trust my own instincts. I grew up in Barberville, small town, simple life, the kind where you learn quick not to make a fuss about things you can't explain. Folks there carry their secrets like coal dust in their lungs, silent, buried, but always present. My father used to say the mountains could hear you think, and the older I get, the more I believe he wasn't speaking in metaphors. That summer, I took a few weeks to stay with my cousin near an old mining road outside of Manchester. I'd been dealing with my own mess back home, a breakup, a blown opportunity to join a trucking apprenticeship, and a growing sense that I was somehow falling behind everyone my age. I needed quiet. I needed space, or at least that's what I told myself. Truth was, I was running from a decision I didn't want to make. My cousin, Wade, lived in a sagging little house on the edge of a forest that dipped down into a network of dried creek beds. There used to be a mine somewhere up the ridge, abandoned, caved in, fenced off now, but folks still talked about it like it breathed under the ground. I didn't put much stock in that kind of talk. I chalked most of it up to boredom and old mountain superstition. But even on the first night, I felt something off. Not dangerous, not hostile, just watchful. Like the trees had eyes, like the humidity was a mouth waiting to speak. I tried brushing it off, but it sat with me, in the chirping of the cicadas, in the way the wind didn't always follow the branches, in the way the nights didn't feel as still as they looked. Still, I pushed it down. I was good at that. Denial had become a kind of armor, thin, worn, but enough to make me feel like I had control. A few days into my stay, Wade asked if I wanted to hike down the creek bed trail. Said it'd take us near the mine, but not close enough for the rangers to bother us. Good way to clear your head, he told me. I didn't know then that the worst things for a troubled mind are the places that give you too much silence. Silence is where all the things you avoid come crawling back. We set out late afternoon when the sun was dropping behind the ridge and the heat clung low in the trees. The creek had dried into a scattered path of smooth stones and pockets of cracked clay, like a scar left behind after something had been taken. The air smelled like metal, sharp, cold, wrong for summer. The kind of scent you notice only because it doesn't belong. For the first mile, everything felt normal. We talked about work, family, nothing meaningful. But at some point, the forest shifted. The light got dim in a way that didn't match the hour. The cicadas went quiet all at once, as if someone closed a door on the sound. And then I noticed something else. The temperature dropped. Not like nightfall, not gradual. It was sudden, brushing along my arms like a hand made of ice. Feel that? I asked. Wade nodded but didn't comment. That's how I knew it scared him too. We kept walking, but every step felt heavier, like the ground was trying to claim us. The deeper we went, the more the air thickened with an odd vibration. Not a sound exactly, but a feeling. A low hum inside the bones, as if the earth were speaking too low to hear. Eventually, the creek bed narrowed to a kind of corridor lined with huge stones. That's where I saw the first light, a blue orb, small about the size of a fist, hovering just above the ground. Not bright enough to illuminate anything around it, but not dim either. Just present, like it was waiting for us. I froze. My first instinct screamed to turn back, but my second instinct, stupidity disguised as curiosity, held me still. I remember thinking it had to be a trick of the sun, a reflection off quartz, some natural phenomenon folks would love to make a tall tale out of. But then the light moved, not floated, not drifted, walked, almost like it had legs, a deliberate path, slow and steady, stepping from stone to stone in a pattern too purposeful to be natural. The glow shifted with every movement, softening, brightening, pulsing like a heartbeat. Wade whispered, "We need to go." But his voice wasn't commanding. It was pleading. I wanted to listen. God knows, I wanted to. But something in me resisted. Something old. Something aching. The part of me that had spent months running from my own choices. It was as if my fear of moving forward in life had pinned my feet to that creek bed. The orb's glow wasn't warm, but it hypnotized me with a strange familiarity, like it recognized the hesitation inside me. The orb paused as if sensing our attention, and then another appeared behind it. Then a third. Each one spaced evenly apart, like a line of silent sentinels rising from the earth itself. They didn't flicker. They didn't sway. They stood in formation, waiting, watching. There was a pressure in the air now, a feeling like we were standing inside a held breath. Wade tugged my sleeve. "Ely, please, these ain't numbers we want to be part of." He didn't have to explain. Mountain folks don't report everything they see, but they sure as hell keep track of what shouldn't be seen twice. I finally managed to turn my body, but the move felt wrong, like I'd just broken some unspoken agreement. We began backing away slowly, not wanting to provoke whatever intelligence those lights carried. But then the forest made a sound I will never forget. A low, mournful groan, like rock shifting deep underground. Except it wasn't beneath us. It was around us, in the trees, in the wind that wasn't blowing, in the air that felt too still to be alive. The lights responded instantly. Their glow brightened, intensified. Then they began moving, walking faster now, matching our pace as we retreated. I tried rationalizing it, maybe swamp gas, though there was no swamp. Maybe miners' lamps reflecting. I knew it wasn't that. Maybe some rare atmospheric thing. Anything but the truth staring at me with cold blue light. That these things were following us, studying the way we moved, mirroring our steps like they were learning what humans looked like in motion. Wade grabbed my arm hard. "Don't run. Whatever you do, don't run." He didn't need to say why. Every instinct I had, the ones I ignored for months, finally clawed to the surface, screaming that running would make us prey. But the lights were drawing closer. Their glow washed across the stones, turning the cracks into blue veins. The air grew colder with every second, and the hum, the bone-deep vibration was getting louder, more deliberate, like something was waking up. My breath shook in my chest, my thoughts scattered, and for the first time in my life I realized how small a person can feel in the presence of something that simply doesn't need to explain itself. We kept retreating until my heel struck a muddy patch and I slipped sideways. I didn't fall all the way, but I landed on my hand hard enough to feel the jolt up my arm. The lights stopped immediately. Their movement froze mid-step. Their glow dimmed, then brightened in a slow, pulsing rhythm like they were communicating, or deciding. That was the moment I understood real fear isn't loud. It isn't screaming or running or fighting. Real fear is silent. It's the quiet realization that something in front of you doesn't follow your rules, your logic, your meaning, something that exists without needing you at all. The lights pulsed again, and then they began moving toward me. They moved toward me in that steady, measured way, like they had all the time in the world and knew I didn't. Wade pulled me up by the collar of my shirt, practically dragging me backward. I could feel his breath shaking against my ear, though he said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Words had no business in that creek bed. The orbs closed the distance slowly, deliberately, like they were studying the shape of my panic. Their glow wasn't harsh, but it was penetrating, Cold, the kind of light that sees more than it reveals. Every pulse of blue washed over my skin with a sensation I still can't fully describe. Not heat, not cold, more like a memory. A brush of something familiar, but twisted out of recognition. We backed up the creek bed slope, each step heavier than the last. The incline was shallow, but it felt like climbing out of a grave. My legs wanted to sprint, my lungs wanted to scream. But Wade's grip stayed locked on my sleeve, grounding me in place, reminding me that if we broke that fragile connection between us, between our movements, they might respond in a way we couldn't undo. The hum in the air rose, slow and steady, matching the orb's light like it was coming from them. But it wasn't. It was coming from everywhere, from the stones, from the trees, from the hollowed-out bones of the mine buried under the ridge. It vibrated through my arms and rattled my teeth. Each pulse felt like a question being asked inside my skull, and something in me, some deep, damaged part, felt dangerously close to answering. We reached the top of the slope, and I felt the forest press in around us. The branches overhead seemed too still, too stiff, as if they weren't trees at all, but ribs encasing us. The last light of the evening had vanished without crossing the sky, and suddenly the only illumination was the unnatural blue rising behind us like a tide. "We're getting out of here," Wade whispered. "Do not look back." I didn't want to, but I did. 3 orbs, no more than 15 feet away, climbing the slope soundlessly. They didn't drift, they stepped, leaving tiny impressions in the loose dust where nothing had touched before. Their glow reflected off the stones in perfect rhythm, like synchronized breaths, but that wasn't the part that froze me. Behind them, deeper in the dark, I saw more. 2, 4, 6. Too many to count. Faint, distant, but moving. All walking, all following the same invisible path toward us. A procession, a migration. The thought hit me so hard my breath stuttered. They weren't appearing. They were arriving. Wade pulled harder. "Eli, please." He'd never pleaded with me in his life. That broke whatever spell held me there. I turned and followed him up the ridge trail, our steps slow but deliberate. The forest offered no comfort. No insects, no wind, no normal night sounds. It felt like the world was holding its breath, observing, waiting to see what choice we'd make. Then, halfway up the trail, everything changed. The hum fell silent. The air warmed suddenly, sharply, like a furnace door opening. And from behind us came a sound I pray I never hear again, a soft, almost delicate tapping, like fingertips brushing stone, rhythmically, patiently, closer with each beat, tap, tap, tap. Not footsteps, not animal movement, a sound like knuckles knocking, testing the world for hollowness. Wade stopped dead. They're on the stones. They're touching the stones. I don't know why that terrified him so deeply, but I felt it too. The idea that these things, whatever they were, weren't just moving through the world, they were interacting with it, probing it, understanding it. Tap, tap, tap. The blue light grew brighter behind us, stretching long shadows up the trail in ragged, shaking lines. That was the moment denial finally died inside me. Every instinct I'd ignored all summer, every warning I'd brushed off, every gut feeling I'd smothered, roared awake with a violence that made my knees weak. We started moving faster, still not running, but close. The tapping grew more frantic, overlapping, multiplying, dozens of tiny impacts against stone, like impatient fingers, like something excited. The air trembled. The ground shuddered in a way that didn't feel seismic, more like something adjusting itself inside the soil. Then, without warning, a blue flash erupted across the trail behind us, bright enough to paint the trees with ghostly color. Wade cursed under his breath and shoved me forward. My hands scraped bark and thorns, but I barely felt anything. All I could focus on was the rhythm of that tapping, the way it built into a strange pattern, almost like communication. We reached the old fence that marked the boundary of the mining property. Rusted, half-collapsed, barely standing, Wade pushed it aside just enough for us to slip through. The moment our feet crossed onto the other side, the tapping stopped. Complete silence. Total, crushing stillness. The blue glow halted exactly at the boundary line, like it couldn't or wouldn't cross the rusted wire. But the lights didn't retreat. They hovered there, pulsing slowly, like hearts beating in the dark. One orb lifted higher than the others, rising a few feet into the air. Its glow intensified until it hurt to look at. And then it flickered. Not randomly, deliberately. Long pulse. Short, short, long. Pause. Then again, Wade whispered, "That's patterned." I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't random at all. It was structured, signal-like, purposeful. Something was aware of us, actively, and trying to convey something we were never meant to understand. The orb pulsed again, and deep in the woods behind the formation, something answered. A faint flash, further away, then another, and another. A chain of light bridging through the trees in silent acknowledgement. And all at once I felt my body go cold, not from fear, but from realization. Whatever they weren't alone. Wade tugged at my arm. "We gotta move." But I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my throat tight, my mind spinning with a question I didn't dare speak. How long have they been here? And how much have they already learned? The blue light pulsed one final time, brighter than before. Not threatening, not hostile, almost sad. Then the orbs slowly backed away, descending the slope in the same synchronized walking pattern, vanishing into the creek bed as silently as they had emerged. The moment they were gone, the forest exhaled, crickets resumed their chirping. Leaves rustled in the faint breeze. The temperature leveled out as if nothing had happened, as if the land had simply resumed its script. But I knew better. I knew the mountains had shown us something they didn't show freely. We walked home without speaking. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow deeper. By the time Wade's house came into view, my legs were trembling so hard I had to sit on the porch steps just to breathe again. Wade stood in front of me, pacing with restless energy. "You don't tell nobody," he said finally. "Not about the creek, not about the lights. Folks know enough to leave that place alone. But they don't know enough to help if someone gets curious." I nodded, but not because I agreed, because I didn't trust my voice not to shake. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blue glow stepping toward me. Calculated, curious, almost human but never pretending to be. And beneath it all, the tapping, those delicate touches against stone, like someone knocking from the other side of a wall you didn't know existed. Over the days that followed, something shifted inside me. The fear settled deep, but it didn't just paralyze. It clarified. All the hesitation I'd been drowning in back home, all the decisions I'd avoided, they suddenly seemed so small in comparison to what I'd witnessed. There are things in this world that move with purpose beyond ours. Things that walk the earth without asking permission, without leaving footprints, without caring if we accept them or not. And somehow knowing that made my own life feel painfully, beautifully real. I left Clay County a week later. Never went back. Never took the creek trail again. But sometimes, especially at night, when the world gets too quiet, I still feel that pulse. Long, short, short, long, faint. Like a memory reminding me of something I'm meant to carry, not escape. I kept it secret for years, but secrets don't burn away fear, they feed it. And some memories don't fade just because you refuse to look at them. There are places in this country where the land watches you, where the dark listens, places where things walk that shouldn't walk at all. And in Clay County, Kentucky, some of them glow blue. Snow has a way of swallowing sound, so when something cuts through it, clear as a knife, you remember it for the rest of your life. My name's Elias Mercer, and in 1994, I was 26 years old, working delivery routes across the rural stretches of Pocahontas County, West Virginia. Back then, I believed the quiet of these mountains was the safest kind of silence a man could ask for. I grew up thinking the world got less dangerous the farther you moved from the cities, like danger couldn't breathe in thin mountain air. But that winter proved something I still struggle to say out loud. Sometimes the places we trust most are the ones that unsettle us the deepest. I lived in a small house outside Marlinton, a place tucked between tree lines so dense they seemed to lean in when the wind rose. Ridge Hollow Road ran out behind my house like an old vein, narrow, cracked and endlessly winding, leading to a handful of scattered homes and abandoned farms. Every night, after long shifts hauling goods, I'd come home to the hum of the radiator, a cup of reheated chili, and the kind of quiet you can only hear when you've lived too long alone. Isolation didn't scare me then. I was young, stubborn, and too proud to admit I carried an undercurrent of unease everywhere I went. Everyone in those days told stories about old coal towns and backwoods haunts, strange cries in the woods, lights flickering near forgotten mines, superstitions passed down like heirlooms. But I dismissed most of it. I thought fear was something you chose, something childish, something I'd grown out of. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday night in mid-January, the kind of cold that locks your joints before your brain even reacts. Snow had fallen all day, piling high against porches, mailboxes, fence posts, everything. By the time I got home, the road was so quiet it felt like even the deer had taken shelter. I parked my truck, grabbed my gloves, and stepped out into the stillness. Then I heard it. 3 notes, whistled slow and deliberate, drifting down from Ridge Hollow Road. I stopped in the middle of the driveway, keys still hanging from my fingers. The whistle wasn't sharp or cheerful. It had a strange softness to it, like someone trying not to be heard but failing. 3 notes, always the same: high, low, high. A child could have blown them, but no child would have been out there. Not in that cold, not at that hour. At first I tried to rationalize it. Some neighbor walking home, maybe. Someone calling a dog. A sound bouncing off the hollow and landing where it shouldn't. But as I stood there, I realized something else. The whistle was moving, drifting, sliding through the darkness like it wasn't tied to anything physical. The hair along my arms and neck rose one by one. I told myself it was nothing. I forced myself inside, locked the door, reheated dinner, and pushed the sound out of my head. That's what I always did when something felt wrong. I ignored it. I called it instinct, but really, it was denial dressed up as logic. I'd spent years telling myself I was too old, too grounded, too sensible to be spooked. But fear doesn't care how old you are. It waits until you're alone, tired, and sure of yourself, and then it finds the cracks. The next morning, the snow was untouched, pure, smooth, perfect. I glanced up the road as I warmed up my truck, expecting to see the trail of whoever had been out there. But there was nothing. Not a single footprint. Not even the indent of a boot heel. Fresh snow reveals everything. Dogs, raccoons, neighbors walking for mail. Yet the road looked like an untouched sheet laid out overnight. Still, I told myself, wind, drifting snow. Somebody could have come through before the snow stopped. I built excuses like walls, and the higher those walls got, the more I refused to look over them. 2 nights later, the whistle returned. This time, it was closer. I had just turned off the TV and was washing a glass in the sink when it floated through the kitchen window. Those same 3 notes, high, low, high, soft enough to be gentle, wrong enough to tighten something deep in my chest. I stood frozen, my fingertips still beneath warm water, and listened. The whistle repeated. Then again. Slow, patient, wandering. Like someone was casually walking down the road, whistling for their own entertainment. Except I knew better. I moved to the window and switched off the light. Darkness pressed against the glass so tightly that my own reflection stared back at me, pale and uncertain. I tried to see beyond it, into the yard, toward the road. Nothing. The whistle faded after a minute, dissolving the way a dream does when you wake up. I barely slept that night. By Friday, word spread around Marlinton. Not loud, not official, just little comments passed between neighbors like cold air through cracks. You hear something strange the other night? Sound carried weird with that snow, probably some drifter passing through. But people avoided details. Everyone danced around it with half-phrases and forced laughs, like naming it would make it real. That's the thing about small towns. Fear spreads quietly, like frost on a window. You don't see it forming until you step close. That evening, before driving home, I stopped by a small general store where an old man named Avery stocked the shelves. He'd lived there longer than anyone I knew. I figured if anyone could shrug off the stories, it would be him. But when I mentioned hearing something unusual on Ridge Hollow Road, Avery didn't laugh. He didn't even look up from the counter. Instead, he said, 3 notes? My stomach dropped. I nodded. Avery rubbed his thumb across a coin, slow and uneasy. Heard that years ago, didn't think it'd come back. It? I asked. He only shook his head. Sometimes the hills pick up old sounds. Don't think too much of it. Just keep your doors locked. And for reasons I can't explain, that last sentence terrified me more than the whistle itself. I drove home with the radio off. Every creak of the truck felt amplified. When I turned onto Ridge Hollow Road, the trees arched over the pavement like ribs. My headlights carved out a narrow path, the edges swallowed by darkness. I parked, stepped out, and for a few seconds the world was still. Then high, low, high. But this time the whistle wasn't up the road. It came from behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun so fast I stumbled in the snow, but the moment I turned, the sound stopped, just died. As if whoever or whatever was making it knew I was listening. The road lay empty. The forest was silent. Even the wind had paused. I backed toward the house without taking my eyes off the tree line. My breath puffed out in frantic clouds. Once inside, I locked every door, every window, then sat with my back against the wall, knees pulled up, listening for anything. Nothing came, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the sound was learning me, learning where I lived, when I got home, how I reacted. The fear didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, like water leaking into a room drip by drip, rising while you pretend it isn't. I didn't want to believe something was out there. I didn't want to believe something might be watching. And I especially didn't want to admit the truth building quietly inside me. The whistle wasn't random. It was intentional, purposeful, directed. The next night, I tested something I didn't tell anyone about. I turned on my porch light and stepped outside, boots sinking into soft snow. The moon was a thin white blade overhead. I stood still, hands in my pockets, breath forming a fog around me, and waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. My pulse pounded so loud it masked everything else. Then, somewhere off to my right, drifting through the trees, high, low, high, my eyes stung with cold or fear. I couldn't tell which. This time, the whistle didn't move. It held its distance, hovering in the same patch of darkness like it was waiting for my next move. I whispered into the night without meaning to. "What do you want?" The whistle stopped instantly. And in that sharp, crushing silence, I realized something with absolute clarity. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to get closer. I shut the door so fast the frame shook. For a long moment, I just stood there, my back pressed against the wood, palms flat, heart thundering like it was trying to escape. Every instinct told me to leave, grab my keys, gun the truck, and drive until those mountains were nothing but a memory. But fear has a strange way of rooting you to the place you want most to escape. You tell yourself you're thinking things through, that running is irrational. But the truth is, terror can feel like gravity. I paced the living room, trying to pull myself together. I kept replaying that whistle, how deliberate it felt, how it stopped the moment I spoke. I kept seeing the empty snow in my mind, that smooth sheet of untouched white where footprints should have been. My thoughts twisted themselves into knots. I told myself it was a prank, a drifter, a local messing around, an echo behaving strangely, but each excuse rang thinner than the last. By midnight, exhaustion forced me to bed. But I didn't sleep much. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I imagined someone standing at the tree line, watching the house, waiting, listening. The next morning, I stepped outside just after dawn. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted proof that I was overreacting. Maybe I wanted something solid, tracks, signs, anything, to anchor the fear to something human. The snow had fallen lightly overnight, dusting the yard and road with a fresh, thin layer. I walked slowly toward the edge of the properties, boots compressing the powder with the softest crunch. My breath clouded in front of me. The air stung with cold. The quiet was absolute. No tracks, no disturbances, no sign that anything or anyone had stood there, watching me the night before. I stared at the empty road so long my face went numb. Finally, I turned back toward the house, ready to chalk it all up to exhaustion and an overactive mind. But halfway up the steps, something caught my eye. On the porch railing, just beside the front door, was a perfectly clean patch, like someone had wiped away the thin snowfall with their hand. No prints, no smudges, just a strange, smooth shape against the white. The air left my lungs in a single, sharp breath. Someone had been on my porch. I locked my doors and stayed inside the rest of the day. I wish I could say I had a plan. I didn't. I cooked without tasting the food. I moved from window to window without knowing what I was looking for. I kept the TV on just to fill the silence, but even that soft murmur felt like it was being listened to, like the walls of the house weren't holding sound in, but holding something else out. Around 5 p.m., as the sky turned a bruised blue and the shadows stretched long across Ridge Hollow Road, someone knocked on my front door. 3 quick taps. I froze. My blood iced over. No one ever came to my house unannounced, and no one should have been out walking on that road in sub-zero cold. The knocking came again. 3 taps. I crept to the window beside the door and pulled back the curtain a sliver. Sheriff Grant stood on my porch, bundled in a heavy coat, hat pulled low, cheeks red with cold. Relief washed through me so hard my knees nearly buckled. I opened the door. "You all right, Elias?" he asked, breath puffing into the air. "I think so," I lied. He leaned his shoulder against the post, looking out toward the road. "Lot of folks saying they've been hearing something strange at night. Thought I'd check in on you." I forced a shrug, trying not to sound unhinged. "Yeah, I've heard a few things." He squinted at me. 3 notes? My skin prickled. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said quickly. "Wind, owls, echoes." He stared at me longer than felt natural, as though he could see the truth simmering right behind my throat. Then he sighed and lowered his voice. "Listen, don't go wandering around at night, and don't try to follow it, whatever you hear." "Why?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Because people have gotten lost on this road before. People who shouldn't have." The way he said it made my stomach twist. Grant turned to leave, then paused. "You hear anything tonight? Turn on every light in the house. Some things keep their distance from the light." Then he walked off the porch, boots crunching steadily down the drive until the darkness swallowed him. Night fell fast, the kind of night that feels older than anything alive. I kept every lamp and overhead bulb blazing. The house glowed like a lighthouse stranded in snow. For hours, nothing happened. Then, close to 11 p.m., the lights flickered. Just once. A quick shuddering dip in brightness, like the house took a sudden breath. I stood from the chair slowly, pulse thumping. The radiator rattled. The refrigerator hummed loudly. The silence between the noises felt too deep. Then the whistle cut through it. High, low, high. It came from the side of the house this time, just past the kitchen wall. I stepped back, my heartbeat climbing into my throat. The whistle repeated, slow, patient, as if letting me know exactly where it stood. My breathing turned shallow. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the phone sat on the wall by the kitchen window, just feet from where the sound was coming from. The whistle edged closer. Then something brushed the siding, soft, like fingers or fabric dragging across wood. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep quiet. Every instinct screamed at me to run upstairs, lock myself away, hide until morning. But something deeper held me still. Something that felt like a mix of dread and curiosity. A need to understand what was happening. A need not to let fear make me blind. I took one slow step toward the window. The whistle stopped. My foot froze midair, my lungs squeezed tight. Then something tapped the glass. Not hard, not violent, just a single, delicate tap, like someone asking permission to come in. Every hair on my body stood up. A cold sweat ran down my back. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on the faint outline of the window. I didn't want to see. I didn't want confirmation. But some part of me couldn't look away. Another tap. Then another. Steady. Rhythmic. Patient. I grabbed the lamp on the table beside me and lifted it, ready to swing, though I wasn't sure at what. My hand shook so badly the shade rattled. Then the porch light blew out. A sharp pop, darkness swallowed half the room. The tapping stopped. The whistle returned. But this time it wasn't outside, it was inside the walls. High, low, high, like it was humming through the beams, through the wiring, through the bones of the house itself. Like the whole structure was vibrating with those three impossible notes. My throat tightened. I dropped the lamp and covered my ears. The whistle seeped through anyway, soft, warm, close, too close. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything went silent again. A deep, crushing silence, the kind that makes you feel like the air itself is listening. I don't remember collapsing to the floor, but I remember waking up there, the dawn light creeping in. Every lamp still on. The house still. My body shaking. I wanted to believe it was a night terror, a distorted dream conjured from fear. But when I stood and walked to the kitchen window, I saw it. A single mark on the glass. Not a fingerprint, not a smudge. A circle. Perfectly drawn. As though someone had pressed their mouth to the pane. Like they'd been whistling into the house. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Something fundamental. Instead of fear anchoring me in place, it pushed me forward. I was done being hunted by a sound I didn't understand. I was done waiting, done hiding, done convincing myself that staying still was safety. I grabbed my coat, my boots, my flashlight, and I stepped out into the snow. The cold hit hard. The morning was barely awake, sky pale, branches heavy with frost. I walked toward the tree line where the sound had come from the night before. My breath rushed white into the air, disappearing as quickly as it formed. I reached the edge of the woods and stopped dead. There, pressed into the snow, were footprints, bare feet, human, deep, fresh. The tracks led into the forest, weaving between trees, disappearing into the dark heart of Ridge Hollow. My pulse hammered in my ears. The rational part of my mind told me to turn back, to call the sheriff, to go inside and pretend none of this existed. But fear had spent enough nights feeding on me, and something else lived under that fear now. Resolve. A kind of quiet, desperate courage I didn't know I had. I followed the tracks. The forest closed around me. Branches creaked overhead. The snow muffled each step, making the world feel distant and wrong. After a dozen yards, I heard it again, soft, drifting between the trees. High, low, high. But this time the sound wasn't ahead of me. It was behind me. I spun, breath catching in my throat. The trees stood still. The path behind me was empty. Another whistle. Off to my left. Another. Behind my right shoulder. The sound circled me, slipping through the forest like it didn't need a body to make it. Like the whistle itself was alive. My vision blurred. My hands shook. Panic crawled up my spine. I stumbled backward, and my heel caught on something. I hit the ground hard, snow exploding around me. I twisted to look. It was an old wooden post, splintered, weather-beaten, buried under years of snow and vines. For a second, it meant nothing. Then I brushed the frost away, and my stomach lurched. A name was carved into the wood. Mercer. My name, my family's name. A grave marker, or what was left of one. A forgotten corner of land where some ancestor had been buried long before my time. A place I never knew existed. The whistle came again, this time softer than ever. Comforting, almost familiar, like someone calling me home. My breath trembled. The fear inside me twisted into something else. Grief, confusion, a terrible sense of recognition I couldn't explain. I staggered to my feet and backed away from the marker, but the snow shifted behind me as though someone else had risen too. I didn't look. I ran. Branches whipped my arms, snow crunched under my boots. The whistle chased me, high, low, high, threads of sound weaving through the trees like it was gliding above the ground. When I burst out of the forest and into my yard, the sound stopped. Just like that. The world fell silent, and for the first time, the fear didn't crush me. It steadied me. I understood what Sheriff Grant had meant. I understood why the sound had no footprints. I understood why it knew my home, my schedule, my name carved into rotting wood. Some things aren't alive in the way we understand. Some things don't leave tracks because they don't need bodies. Some things stay in the hollows of these mountains long after the people who made them are gone. I walked back to the house slowly, breath shaking, legs weak. Just before I stepped inside, the wind carried a faint sound across Ridge Hollow Road. High, low, high. Not threatening this time, just a reminder. A presence that would never fully leave, but no longer needed to chase me. Because I finally understood it. And understanding is its own kind of courage. I closed the door behind me, locking it gently, not out of fear, but out of respect for the things that watch over these mountains, unseen and unheard, except for the rare winter nights when the world goes quiet enough for old spirits to be remembered. And sometimes remembered things answer back. I've always believed that some silences carry their own kind of warning. Quiet that doesn't settle, quiet that doesn't relax, quiet that watches you back. And if there was ever a place where silence felt like a living thing, it was the stretch of forest along Laurel Fork in Carter County, Tennessee. I didn't understand it the first time I came here. I didn't even respect it. But I do now. More than I wish I did. My name is Eli Ward. I'm 33 from Winchester, Kentucky, a quiet place where the hills roll soft and the people talk slow. I grew up around woods, creeks, and miles of untouched land. I learned to track, to fish, to move quietly, to notice the small things, broken twigs, coyote prints, the faint shift of wind that means rain is coming. I thought familiarity made me safe. I thought knowing the woods made me immune to fear. But that's the kind of arrogance that only lasts until something takes it from you. In the fall of 2011, I drove down into Carter County after hearing about a backpacker who'd gone missing near the Laurel Fork Trail. I didn't know the man, not personally, but people in rural communities have a way of adopting strangers into their concern. A missing soul in the woods feels like a loose thread, something tugging at everyone, whether they admit it or not. The details that reached me were strange, even before I saw them with my own eyes. A solo backpacker, no criminal past, no mental health issues anyone knew of, vanished in the middle of a cool October morning. The strangest part was what he left behind. A mug of coffee, still warm by the fire ring, and his boots placed neatly beside it, toes aligned, heels pressed to the same point on the ground. It looked deliberate, almost ritualistic, and it didn't fit any scenario my mind tried to conjure. I'd come to help search, to give whatever time or skill I could, and maybe to satisfy a gnawing instinct, one I kept trying to push down, that something was wrong in a way that didn't match the surface. I arrived early, fog still clinging low between the trees. The local sheriff's team had been searching for 2 days by then. They were tired, not panicked, not yet, but worn down in a way that showed in their eyes more than their posture. I checked in with a deputy named Cates, a quiet man with crow's feet and a gaze that drifted off into the tree line. When he told me where they'd found the campsite, he hesitated. "Just don't touch the boots," he added. "You'll see why." That sentence stayed in my mind as I hiked in. The ground was soft from the night's moisture, and every step made a faint sucking sound that felt too loud beneath the canopy. I kept expecting to hear birds or squirrels or the creak of branches, but the woods felt emptied, as if everything living had stepped back behind some invisible curtain. I thought maybe it was just me, too aware, too focused. But part of me recognized something else. The hush before a storm, the pause before an animal bolts, except nothing moved. When I reached the missing man's campsite, 2 searchers were already there, quietly marking the perimeter. I didn't speak right away. I just stood at the edge of the clearing and let my eyes adjust to the scene. The fire ring was cold now, but the coffee mug beside it still sat upright, half full. The surface had a dried ring around the edge, not fresh, but not old either. And then the boots. They were placed side by side, almost lovingly. Clean inside, untouched. And it was the placement that bothered me. Not careless, not hurried, like the owner had taken time to line them up just right. No sign of struggle, no drag marks or prints leading away that looked barefoot. Just absence. One of the searchers glanced my way. "We swept again this morning. Dogs won't take the scent past this point." "Won't?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not can't. Won't." There was something unsettling in the way he said it, as if the dogs knew something the people didn't, as if they sensed a boundary they refused to cross. I knelt near the boots, careful not to touch them, and scanned the ground. leaves undisturbed, soil flattened only by the boots themselves. Nothing odd visually. But as the breeze shifted through the clearing, a faint odor touched the air. Something metallic, something like old pennies and cold water. Not blood, not rot. More like iron dust. I frowned and stood up, rubbing my arms as a ripple of cold passed over me. That was the first moment I felt watched. I've felt eyes on me before. Hunters, animals, even people in parking lots who linger too long. This was different. There was no direction to it. It felt like the forest itself had turned its gaze toward us, expressionless and patient, like it was waiting to see what we would do next. I pushed the thought away. I'd come here to help, not to indulge in superstitions. But as we spread out in teams, combing the areas downstream and along the adjacent ridges, that same cold sensation followed me, rising and falling like invisible waves. Sometimes my ears popped as if I'd changed altitude. Sometimes I thought I heard something, soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. But every time I turned, nothing moved. I tried to rationalize it. Air pockets, temperature flux, my own imagination. But with each hour, something inside me tightened. A resistance, a whisper telling me to stop, to turn back, to let this place be. And I hated that whisper, hated how much it felt like instinct instead of fear. By afternoon, I separated slightly from the group to check a slope covered in rhododendron thickets. The branches brushed my arms with a sticky, cold dew that felt unnaturally chilled for the time of day. As I pushed through, the smell returned, iron, faint but persistent, and my stomach tightened. Then I heard it. A soft, muted knock, not woodpecker fast, not random. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 again. I froze. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far. It carried cleanly through the trees, as if directed. I held my breath and listened. For a moment, everything fell silent again. The forest, the wind, even my own heartbeat felt suspended. Then the knocks came once more. Same rhythm, same slow, deliberate pause between sets. Someone else might have called out. Someone else might have told themselves it was a branch shifting or a tree settling. But I'd lived around woods my whole life. I knew the language of trees. I knew when a sound was natural. And this wasn't. I crouched slightly, scanning the shadows between trunks. Nothing moved. No footprints appeared on the slope below. No sound of footsteps or brush breaking. Just that steady, patient knocking, like someone signaling, like someone waiting. Denial tugged at me. I told myself the missing man might be injured, unable to yell, but able to tap something. But what would he be knocking on? Why only 3? Why with such calm repetition? I radioed in my location, voice steady but my fingers trembling slightly. I've got an unusual sound out here. I'm going to check it out. The crackle on the radio felt louder than it should have. I didn't wait for a full response. I just moved toward the sound, careful not to break twigs, trying not to disturb whatever rhythm I'd walked into. The knocking shifted as I walked, not louder, not quieter, just repositioned, as if it moved around me in a slow arc. I kept turning my head, trying to pinpoint it, but it had no anchor. It felt diffused through the trees, like it radiated from all sides. An unease settled deep in my gut, my throat tightened, my hands went cold. But I kept walking, resisting the urge to retreat, because I needed to know. Because something in those woods didn't want to be found, and something else didn't want us finding him. I moved slowly, angling downhill, letting the uneven ground guide my steps. The knocking had become softer now, more spaced out, almost hesitant, like it realized I was following, like it didn't expect me to keep coming. As I edged through a tangle of roots, something shifted in my peripheral vision. A shadow, low to the ground, slipping behind a stump. I whipped my head toward it, but the space was empty. Only the quiet, wide, and watching. My breathing grew shallow. I hated how the fear didn't feel like the kind that spikes and fades. It was the kind that grows with each second, curling around the ribs, tightening its hold. I pressed a hand against a tree trunk, steadying myself. The bark was damp and strangely cold, as if the tree had been standing in shade for days, not hours. A breeze rolled through the branches overhead, but it felt warm against my face. Unnatural, mismatched, like the woods couldn't decide what season it was supposed to be. The knocks resumed. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. This time, the sound came from below me, near a shallow ravine thick with fallen leaves. I knelt to get a better view. The smell of iron grew stronger. The taste of it sat on my tongue like a warning. "Hello?" I called softly, though my voice felt swallowed by the air before it could travel. "If somebody needs help, call out. I'm right here." No answer. No movement. Only that deliberate knock, traveling through the trees like a signal sent through bones. I took a few more steps down, scanning the ravine floor. The leaves were piled deep, untouched, but oddly uniform, as if they'd drifted there without disturbance from wind or animal. I felt my chest tighten. Something in me whispered to turn back, to let this go. But I didn't, because I kept thinking of the boots, the warm coffee, the man who'd walked into these woods and somehow walked out of his own life without taking a single possession he needed to survive. The deeper I moved into the ravine, the more the temperature shifted. At first, it was the cold, sharp, sudden biting along my arms, then heat, rising in waves from the ground like trapped breath. My vision flickered, not from darkness, but from disorientation. The air felt thick, almost metallic, and then the knocking stopped, not faded, stopped as if a hand had been lifted mid-motion. The stillness that followed was absolute, a held breath. I scanned the trees, my heartbeat thudding loud enough that I felt it in my throat. The silence pressed in closer with each second. I tightened my grip on the radio and opened my mouth to speak. Then something whispered. Not a word, not a language, more like a breath brushing past my ear from inches away. A faint exhale that didn't belong to me. I jerked sideways, spinning around. Nothing was there. But the whisper had been real. I felt the warmth of it, the movement of air, the sense of someone leaning close enough to touch. My pulse hammered. The whisper came again, softer, this time behind me. I stumbled back, boots digging into the leaf-strewn ground. "Who's there?" The question trembled out of me before I could shape it properly. No answer, but the whispering seemed to linger like residue in the air, as if whatever had spoken still hovered nearby. And then came something worse. Footsteps. Not heavy, not running. Slow, deliberate, pacing steps. But they didn't come from a single direction. They circled, moving around me without displacing a single leaf. I turned in a full circle, eyes darting, breath sharp. "Kate's?" I whispered into the radio. "I need another team down in the ravine. Something's off." Static crackled back at me. Then the line went dead. I tried again. Nothing. That tight feeling in my chest spread down my arms. The footsteps stopped. The air grew colder. And then, without sound or movement, the knocking resumed. But this time it came from beneath me, not the ground beneath me. I would have felt that. It came from below the ravine floor, deep, muted, as if something was tapping from under layers of earth. 3 slow knocks, a pause. 3 again. I crouched, hand hovering above the thick blanket of leaves. The knocks reverberated through the ground in a way that made my fingertips rise with goosebumps. I swallowed hard, dread tightening around my spine. The missing man, the boots, the warm coffee. Was this where he'd gone? My mind rebelled. I told myself it was a hollow or a buried log. I told myself anything that kept me rooted in logic. But deep down, instinct pushed through my denial. Something was wrong beneath this ravine. Something was waiting. I reached forward, brushing aside some leaves. Beneath them, the soil was unnaturally smooth, packed down in a way that didn't match the surrounding forest floor. No animal burrow could do that. No rainfall or runoff would leave it this level. My breath fogged in front of me, even though the air felt warm. My fingers tingled. The knocking stopped again. Silence returned, thicker than before. I stayed crouched, frozen in place. Then I saw it, a depression in the soil, barely noticeable, an indent the size of a heel, a second one beside it, side by side, perfectly aligned, as if someone had stood here, as if someone had been standing here just before I arrived. A chill crawled up my spine. I stood slowly, every movement careful. The forest remained frozen. No wind, no insects, no birds. I felt swallowed by the quiet. "I need backup," I tried again into the radio. "Anyone copy?" Still nothing. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, not far, 50 feet at most. Then another snap. Another snap, closer. Slow, steady, purposeful. Someone was walking toward me, or something. I turned, breath shaking out in short bursts. "Hello, this is search and rescue. If you're out here, I need you to speak up." No voice answered, but the snapping stopped, replaced again by those soft, careful footsteps that didn't match the weight of someone breaking branches. Like something walked lightly, but the forest broke under it anyway. My throat went dry. I backed up toward a sloping bank, getting some elevation. The footsteps circled again, just beyond my visual range, moving from shadow to shadow. My hands trembled despite every effort not to show it. Then something moved behind a cluster of rhododendron. The leaves trembled, not from wind, but from something passing through them. A dark shape shifted beyond the branches, low and subtle, like a person crouched and watching. I swallowed hard. "Step out where I can see you." The shape didn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But the stubborn part of me, the part that couldn't let go of the man who'd left his boots so neatly, the man who'd vanished in silence, kept me rooted. I needed to know if whoever or whatever was watching me had seen him too. I took one step closer to the rhododendron. The shape vanished. No rustle, no sound. Gone. I spun around, scanning the clearing. Something brushed against my shoulder, light like fingertips made of air. I flinched hard, stumbling back. Again, there was nothing behind me. Only trees. My pulse hammered. My breath came fast. For the first time, I considered leaving the woods altogether. Not retreating, running. But as I turned toward the slope I'd come from, something caught my eye. At the top of the ridge, standing completely still, was a figure. Tall, motionless, half hidden behind a tree. Only the outline visible, not enough to identify, just enough to know it was watching me. My skin went cold. I blinked, and the figure stepped back behind the tree, disappearing without a sound. A voice, my own instinct, finally pushed through all the denial, all the logic I tried to cling to. "Get out. Now." I didn't run. Not yet. But I backed out of the ravine with slow, steady steps, not turning my back until the slope rose enough to block the clearing from my view. Only then did I move faster, breath breaking in my chest, eyes darting to every shadow. The knocking didn't follow me. The whisper didn't return. But the sense of being watched grew stronger with every step. When I reached the trail again, the radio crackled. "Ward? Eli? You okay out there?" I didn't answer at first. My hands shook too much to hold the radio steady. Because now I knew one thing for certain. The missing camper didn't leave that campsite willingly. And whatever had taken him had almost reached me too. I steadied my breathing before I answered, trying to force composure into my voice. "Copy," I said, though the word felt thin. "I'm heading back to the main trail. Something's off down in the ravine. I need another team to sweep it." The radio hissed, then Kate's replied, "We lost your signal for a while. You sure you're all right?" I hesitated. I could have lied. I could have said I was fine, that I'd just lost my footing or followed a false sound. But the truth pressed heavy against my ribs. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I'm coming back." As I moved, the forest gradually regained its voice, not all at once, but in fragments. First, a soft rustle in the underbrush, then a distant trickle of water. Then, faintly, the chirp of a bird. It felt like the woods were exhaling after holding their breath too long. I didn't know if that brought me relief or something closer to dread. By the time I reached the main trail, 2 deputies were already approaching. One of them, Reyes, looked at me with a frown that deepened as soon as she saw my face. "You look like you saw a ghost," she murmured. "Worse," I said before I could stop myself. Cates joined us a minute later. He studied me, searching my expression for something he could name. When he didn't find it, he motioned to the slope behind me. "Show us." I didn't want to go back down there, not with daylight fading, not with the memory of that whisper still brushing the back of my ear. But I also knew we couldn't ignore the ravine. If the missing man had been taken there, or if something had happened beneath that packed earth, walking away would be unforgivable. I nodded. "All right, stay close." We moved in a tight formation this time, radio checks every few minutes. No one talked beyond necessary updates. The deputies weren't superstitious men, But the woods had a way of changing the air around you, of shaping silence into something that felt like a weight on your shoulders. They sensed it too. I saw it in their posture, in the way their eyes never lingered on one spot too long. When we reached the mouth of the ravine, I stopped. The temperature had dropped again, subtle but noticeable. A thin mist clung to the ground, swirling in slow movements like steam off a winter pond. Kate's frowned. This wasn't here earlier. I know, I said quietly. Be careful where you step. We moved down the slope. Reyes scanned the tree line. You said you heard knocking? Yes, I replied. But it wasn't coming from any direction. It moved around. And toward the end, it felt like it was coming from below. Below the ground? She asked. Below the ravine floor, I corrected, though that didn't make it less insane. Cates paused and crouched, running his hand lightly through the leaves. Something's disturbed here, he murmured. You sure you didn't kick this up? I didn't touch that area, I said. I didn't get closer than 10 feet. He brushed aside more leaves, revealing the same smooth, densely packed soil I had seen earlier. His expression shifted, a crease forming between his brows. This is strange, not natural. Reyes knelt beside him. Could be a collapsed animal den. No animal makes soil this uniform, I said before I could stop myself. The two deputies looked at me. I didn't bother hiding the tremor that crept into my voice. Look for the footprints, I told them. It took a moment, but they found them, the faint heel impressions side by side, perfectly aligned. Cates stared at them for a long moment. These weren't left by any of us. No, I said. And they weren't here hours ago. Reyes straightened slowly. Then whoever made them was here recently. Or whatever, I thought, but didn't say it. Cates exhaled sharply. All right, let's widen the search. Reyes, take the east side. Eli, stay with me. We moved deeper into the ravine, the place where I'd heard the whisper. The air felt heavier now, as if the forest had dropped another layer of silence over us. My chest tightened. My instincts screamed again. Not a warning now, but a plea. Let's turn back. But we kept going. When we reached the center of the ravine, Kate stopped abruptly. Do you smell that? I did. The iron scent returned, stronger than before. It coated the back of my throat with a metallic tang. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but the taste was still there. Reyes called from a short distance away. Kates, you need to see this. We hurried toward her voice. She stood at the base of an old fallen tree, pointing toward a patch of disturbed soil. Not just disturbed, shoved outward, like something had pushed up from beneath. The earth was cracked and raised, leaves scattered around the edges. Kates crouched again. This wasn't here before. No, I whispered. It wasn't. He brushed dirt away and froze. Beneath the upper layer of soil was fabric, dark fabric, cloth from a backpack. A chill tore through me. Reyes muttered a curse under her breath. Kate signaled for us to stand back and radioed the others. His voice was steady, but the tension in it was unmistakable. As he spoke, I scanned the tree line again. That's when I saw the figure. Not on the ridge this time, not obscured by distance. It stood at the edge of the ravine, closer than it had ever been. A tall silhouette, unnaturally still, its posture too rigid to be human, too balanced, too centered. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't see features at all. Only darkness where a person should have been, as if the woods had carved out the shape of a man and let nothing fill it. I blinked, and it stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step. The deputies didn't see it. They were focused on the disturbed earth. I opened my mouth to warn them, but no sound came out. My voice locked in my throat as if the air refused to carry it. The figure took another step. Reyes turned toward me then, maybe to ask something. Her gaze swept past my shoulder, and she froze. Her breathing stumbled. Her hand instinctively went to the flashlight on her belt. Kates, she whispered. Do you see that? Kates turned, and his face drained of color. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. The forest didn't either. Even the mist seemed suspended. Then the figure took a third step, not fast, not threatening, just approaching. Reyes lifted her light, angling it toward the shape. The beam should have pierced the shadows. It should have revealed something, clothing, hair, skin, anything. But the light bent away from it. It didn't reflect. It didn't illuminate. It curved, like the darkness around the figure swallowed it whole. Ray's breath hitched. What is that? The figure took another step, and it knocked. 3 soft taps, the same rhythm I'd heard in the ravine. Tap, tap, tap. Kate stumbled backward. Back up, he ordered, voice shaking. Rays, fall back. Ward, move. We retreated up the slope. The figure didn't change pace. It didn't speed up or slow down. It simply kept coming, walking with the patience of something that didn't need to rush. The knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. We broke into a run, scrambling up the slope, grabbing at roots and branches. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that to look would mean seeing something I wasn't meant to understand. When we reached the trail, Reyes bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for breath. Cates pressed a hand against a tree trunk, trying to steady himself. His radio crackled as more deputies approached from the north. I finally dared to turn around. The figure was gone. The woods looked empty, still, too still. What the hell was that? Reyes whispered. No one answered. We didn't have an answer. That night, the search was suspended. Not officially. No one wanted to record fear as a reason, but quietly and formally. Cates told us we'd resume in the morning. But I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't want to go back down there. None of us did. I slept in my truck, though sleep wasn't the right word. I drifted in and out, my mind replaying the knocks, the whispers, the figure standing so impossibly still. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt like something watched me through the window, something that didn't blink. By dawn, the search teams regrouped. But when we returned to the ravine, the soil we'd uncovered had been smoothed over, perfectly flat. As if someone had pressed it down overnight with meticulous care, the footprint impressions were gone too, wiped clean. No animal could have done that. No weather could have undone disturbed soil so precisely. Cates called off the search by noon. We covered miles of trail that day, but everyone's hearts were elsewhere. We knew we weren't searching for a living man anymore. And whatever had taken him, it didn't leave traces the way natural things did. I drove home that evening with the radio off, letting the hum of my tires pull me back towards something like normal. But normal didn't come. It hasn't come since. Because I can still hear it sometimes. Late at night, when the house settles and the silence feels too wide, I hear it. 3 soft taps. A long, patient pause. 3 more taps. Like something reminding me that it watched me once. Like something letting me know it remembers. I think about those boots by the fire ring. The warm coffee. The careful, deliberate way everything was left behind. That man didn't wander off. He didn't run. He didn't get lost. He was taken. And I came closer to joining him than I want to admit. If there's one thing I learned out there in the woods of Laurel Fork, it's this. Sometimes the forest doesn't hide what happened. Sometimes it shows you quietly, patiently, hoping you'll understand before you end up buried beneath it. And sometimes something out there knocks, not to come in, not to be let inside, but to see who's willing to follow the sound, to who steps close enough to take next. I never thought a simple walk in the Highlands could feel like stepping into someone else's nightmare. My name is Rachel. I was 28 at the time, and I lived in a quiet corner of Virginia, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your parents' names, and sometimes even the color of your secrets. That summer of 2003, my husband, my young son, and I decided to escape the noise of the city for a weekend trip to Grayson Highlands. We'd heard stories about the wild ponies, the old trails, and the scenic vistas that seemed to stretch forever. The kind of place where, at least in the photographs, the sun painted everything in golden, forgiving light. The dog, Baxter, was usually fearless. A sturdy shepherd mix with a coat that shimmered in the sun, he had a confidence that reminded me of my own childhood courage. He'd wrestled with bears in our imagination, chased stray raccoons off the porch, and never once flinched at thunderstorms. But that day, he froze. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun low and soft behind the rolling ridges. Fog had begun to snake through the valleys, curling around rocks and trees like something alive. The air smelled of damp pine, moss, and earth, a scent I had always found comforting. But there was a tension I couldn't name, a shift in the rhythm of the wind, almost as if the highlands themselves were exhaling, watching us. We found the trailhead near a forgotten parking lot, the sign half swallowed by ivy and lichen. The wooden bridge that crossed the creek wasn't much to look at. Slats uneven, nails protruding, and a strange creak that promised it might collapse if pressed too hard. But it was part of the trail, and we thought little of it. Baxter stopped at the foot of the bridge. His ears went flat, his muscles tensing as though he'd smelled something only he could perceive. He wouldn't step forward. At first, I laughed. "Come on, Baxter, it's just a little bridge," I called. But he wouldn't budge. Not an inch. My husband tried to coax him with treats, and even my son, holding his small hand out with childish insistence, couldn't tempt him. The fog had grown thicker, curling along the edges of the bridge like tendrils. I remember how quiet it was, the kind of silence that doesn't just mute sound, but warps it, makes the slightest noise feel amplified and alien. My own heartbeat sounded too loud. Every step I took on the gravel seemed to echo endlessly, each one a drumbeat in the growing tension. I knelt down to Baxter, my hands trembling slightly as I ran them along his fur. He shivered, staring past me at the bridge with an intensity that was almost human. His low growl was subtle at first, a vibration in his chest, but it grew sharper, more insistent. I could feel the hair on my arms rise. Something about the way he looked, frozen in place, made the air seem thicker, almost viscous, as if we had crossed into a different dimension. We tried to cross without him. Step by step, the old wood groaning under our weight, the fog swallowing each movement until the far end of the bridge was no more than a vague gray smear. Halfway across, I felt it, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my bones, a cold that wasn't coming from the damp wood or the evening air. I froze, a prickle of fear crawling across my scalp. And then I heard it. A knock. Not one knock, but three, soft and deliberate, echoing from somewhere below the fog. My husband paused. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my voice lodged somewhere behind my teeth. Baxter's growl now merged with a kind of whimper, low and trembling. The bridge swayed gently beneath us, though the wind was barely stirring. The sound came again, 3 deliberate knocks, and I realized it wasn't the wood settling. It was coming from the creek below, or something in it. We turned back. Step by careful step, we retraced our path, each one creaking in protest. Baxter bolted past us once we were back on solid ground, his nails clicking against the gravel like tiny hammers. The fog seemed to retreat slightly as we moved away from the bridge, but a lingering tension remained, prickling the edges of my awareness. The air smelled different here, sour and damp, like something had died recently. We decided to leave the trail. My husband muttered about coming back in daylight, but my instincts told me that was a mistake. Even in the fading sun, the highlands seemed to shift, the trees leaning as if to watch, to warn. My son didn't complain. He trusted me completely, and I carried that responsibility like a physical weight pressing against my ribs. That night, in our rented cabin, I couldn't sleep. Baxter refused to enter the bedroom, staying by the doorway, ears perked, body rigid. I lay awake listening to the night, hearing whispers I couldn't locate, the kind of soft, indecipherable noises that make your mind race and your stomach churn. I told myself it was the wind, the trees, the ordinary creaks of a wooden cabin. But the knot in my chest said otherwise. The next morning, sunlight sliced through the fog like a blade, and we tried to rationalize the previous day's events. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, my imagination amplified by Baxter's sudden fear. Maybe it was a structural oddity of the bridge, a sound echoing from below in a strange pattern. But even as we joked, the memory of those knocks, soft and deliberate, lingered. Baxter refused to look at the bridge again, turning his head sharply if we even mentioned it. I tried to rationalize my own fear, to convince myself I had overreacted, and yet there was a lesson buried in the tension, a warning that I felt more than understood. Sometimes the instincts of those we love, the ones who cannot speak in words, carry truths that our human minds resist, Baxter had known something we couldn't, something that lurked beyond comprehension, hidden in fog and shadow. I carried that understanding with me on the drive home. The mountains fell away behind us, and the warmth of the valley seemed almost unnatural after the cold, suffocating silence of the highlands. I thought about the creatures we imagine, the monsters we dismiss as fairy tales, and realized that fear isn't always about what you see. Sometimes it's about what refuses to move, what refuses to cross the threshold when every rational argument insists it should. And Baxter, my fearless companion, had refused for a reason. The following week, I couldn't stop thinking about that bridge. Every night, the memory clawed at me. Baxter's growl, the deliberate knocks, the fog curling like smoke over the wood. It lodged itself in my dreams, morphing into shapes I couldn't name. In some, I crossed the bridge alone, every plank quaking beneath me as unseen eyes watched from the mist. In others, Baxter waited at the edge, a silent sentinel refusing to betray the unknown. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, my pulse still thrumming in my ears, and yet I felt drawn back to the highlands, compelled to understand what had held my dog so firmly at bay. I finally convinced my husband to return with me, reasoning that daylight might dissipate whatever fear had taken hold. My son naturally clung to Baxter with an intensity I hadn't noticed before, and the dog, ever cautious, trotted beside him with a stiffness that mirrored my own tension. The sun was higher this time, and the fog had receded into wisps along the ridges, but the air still carried that unsettling weight. Something in Grayson Highlands had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, since our last visit. As we approached the bridge again, I noticed small details I had missed before. The planks weren't just uneven, they were scarred, some with shallow grooves that could have been made by weather or something else. The nails protruded in jagged, irregular patterns, almost like the bridge had been repaired hastily by hands that did not care for safety. The creek beneath it babbled like any other, but its rhythm felt too deliberate, too conscious, like it was aware of our presence. Baxter stopped again, ears flat, muscles tense, but this time I understood. He wasn't afraid of falling or of the bridge collapsing. He was afraid of crossing into something else entirely. I knelt beside him, running my hand along his warm fur, feeling the tremor that vibrated through his body. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely carrying over the creek. "I know there's something there. I have to see." My husband exchanged a glance with me, silent acknowledgement passing between us. We had always been explorers at heart, chasing the unfamiliar with a mix of excitement and dread. But something about this moment demanded caution. I stepped onto the bridge alone. Every movement amplified the sounds beneath me, the groaning of the wood, the low ripple of the creek, the whisper of wind through the fogged trees. It was colder here, too cold, like the bridge was a barrier between warmth and something far older, far more unyielding. My eyes strained to see the other side, but the fog had thickened, rising in rolling waves that swallowed the landscape. And then I heard it again. 3 deliberate knocks, soft but insistent, echoing from below the planks as if something beneath the water had rhythm. Had I breath caught? I froze. Rational thought fled, only instinct remained, urging me backward, urging me to listen, to respect the warning, and yet the need to understand pushed me forward. Step by step, I pressed across the bridge, each plank a hesitant beat in a symphony of tension. Halfway across, the knocks came again, closer this time, almost beneath my feet. I looked down, my stomach tightening, and saw nothing, only swirling water and fog. But I felt it, a presence, ancient and patient, observing from a place that was neither fully here nor fully gone. I reached the center, heart hammering, when a sudden gust of wind swirled through the highlands, cutting across the bridge like a blade. The fog shifted violently, revealing for a fraction of a second a shadowed figure, or perhaps the outline of something not entirely human. My mind tried to rationalize, to dismiss it as a trick of the light, the shape of a tree, the angle of the sun. But the instinct that had guided Baxter all along screamed louder than any rational thought. Turn back. I did. Every plank moaned in protest as I retreated, the presence seeming to linger, following, breathing in tandem with me. When I reached the foot of the bridge, Baxter leapt onto my side, pressing close, as if to ground me, to remind me that some boundaries were not meant to be crossed. My husband caught my hand, his eyes wide, reading the story in my expression without words. My son clung to me, sensing the lingering fear, the raw, inexplicable knowledge that we had brushed against something beyond comprehension. We left the trail that day, no photos, no heroic gestures. The highlands swallowed the bridge and the fog behind us, erasing our passage as if it had never been traversed. But the feeling remained, an invisible imprint on the memory, a weight that pressed against the back of my mind. Baxter refused to even glance in that direction again. My son never forgot the sense of something waiting in silence, the terror that wasn't loud but insistent, pervasive, and alive. Over the years, I returned in my mind often, reflecting on what had happened. I came to understand that the fear we felt was not the fear of a fall or of getting lost or even of the fog itself. It was the fear of the unknown that watches and waits, the kind that speaks in subtle warnings rather than screams. Baxter had been our guide, our protector, in a way that transcended understanding. His instincts, honed in ways we cannot teach or reason with, had warned us against a crossing we weren't meant to make. I learned from that experience to trust the quiet signals, the subtle hesitations that ripple through those we love. Fear is not always irrational. Often it is the mind and body responding to truths we cannot articulate, to dangers we cannot name. And sometimes the most courageous act is not moving forward, but stepping back, honoring the limits that are there to protect us, even when we do not fully understand them. In the years that followed, I often hiked other trails, crossed other bridges, and sought out adventures that tested courage and resilience. But I never returned to that bridge in Grayson Highlands. The memory of that fog, the rhythmic knocks, and Baxter's unwavering refusal remained etched in my consciousness, a reminder of the delicate balance between bravery and wisdom. The Highlands had not changed. We had. I had learned to listen, to perceive the warnings embedded in the world around me, and to respect the quiet, intelligent voices that often speak without words. That trip, which began as a simple family outing, became a lesson in the invisible threads that bind fear, instinct, and survival. I think of Baxter often and how his silence communicated more than words ever could. I think of my son, who at that age learned an early and profound lesson in trust, vigilance, and respect for the world's hidden shadows. And I think of myself, standing at the edge of the bridge, heart hammering, knowing that courage sometimes means listening to fear instead of defying it. The dog that wouldn't cross the old bridge taught me more than any guidebook, map, or story could. Fear is not the enemy. It is a signal, a messenger of boundaries and truths. Trust it. Listen. Respect the limits set not just by the world, but by the living creatures who navigate it with senses we can barely comprehend. I often recount this story to friends and strangers alike, warning them and inspiring them simultaneously. Not to frighten, but to illuminate. There is a power in understanding, a strength in restraint, and a deep, abiding courage in acknowledging that some thresholds are not meant to be crossed. Baxter's gaze, unwavering and wise, is etched into my memory as a silent testament to this truth. And now when I revisit that memory, it no longer terrifies me. It strengthens me. It reminds me that life's lessons sometimes come from those who cannot speak in words, but guide with intuition, presence, and instinct. The bridge remains in my mind, fog-shrouded and untraveled, a symbol of the unknown that waits patiently for respect and understanding. We all have bridges in our lives, the choices that demand courage, the risks that call to us, the unknown that tempts our curiosity. And sometimes the bravest act is simply to step back, to honor the warning, to trust what cannot be explained. Baxter taught me that, and in trusting him, in acknowledging what I could not yet understand, I discovered the truest form of courage, respect for the unseen, reverence for instinct, and the quiet power of restraint. I never expected a hunting trip to change the way I understand fear. My name is Clara Simmons. I was 28 at the time, and I grew up in the rolling hills of North Georgia, where the air smells like wet pine and the land seems to hum with something just beneath the surface. I wasn't a stranger to the woods, but I had always known them to be familiar, predictable, safe, or at least I had thought so. That September in 1999, I learned that familiarity can be deceptive, and that some places are not just wild, they are hungry. We were heading into Rabun County, a stretch of Georgia that most people think of as picturesque. Creeks whispering through moss-laden trees, small towns that seem to have stopped aging 50 years ago, and fields that stretched lazily into the horizon. But I'd been warned. Locals spoke of the kudzu, that green, choking vine that spread like spilled ink across the hills, smothering everything in its path. Most dismissed it as a nuisance, a joke to cut down during weekends of yard work. But there was something about it, even in casual conversation, that made your stomach tighten, like it was hiding something. Or worse, waiting. I had come along with two friends, James and Harold. James was 29, tall and wiry, the kind of guy who laughed at his own jokes and had never known fear beyond what movies told him to feel. Harold was older, 42, quiet, with eyes that lingered too long on shadows. He had a steady hand and a way of reading the woods that always made me think he could hear them speaking. The three of us were hunters, but not the kind to chase trophies. We came for solitude, for the sense of being alive in a place where the world couldn't touch us. That illusion was shattered within the first hour. We parked the truck at the edge of a field where the kudzu had begun its suffocating crawl. The sun was low, spilling gold and crimson across the hills. I remember the smell first, sweet and cloying, like rotting sugar. It clung to everything, and I could feel it sticking to my skin, slipping into my lungs. The deeper we went, the thicker the kudzu became. It was almost cinematic in the way it folded over itself, hiding hollows and tree trunks beneath an impossible tangle. I trailed behind James and Harold, and though I tried to ignore it, there was a sound I couldn't place. A faint, human-like cry. Probably some lost dog, James said, shrugging without turning. His voice carried a casual confidence that should have been comforting, but it wasn't. My stomach twisted, and I felt a tremor in my hands. The woods weren't supposed to whisper like that. We pressed on. The cry returned, louder this time, more insistent. "Help, please," it said. It wasn't a growl or a hoot or anything animals make. It was unmistakably human. I froze, the hairs on my neck prickling as though the air itself had become electrified. James kept moving, calling over his shoulder, "It's probably a kid playing a prank. Don't worry about it." But Harold's frown deepened, and he slowed his pace. I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. He was sensing what I was sensing. The vines pressed closer, closing off paths and shaping the landscape into a maze. Every step became deliberate, careful, as if the kudzu itself could pull us under if we faltered. And then, without warning, the cries stopped. Silence fell like a heavy sheet. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, your thoughts shout too loudly. I looked around, trying to see through the green curtain, but the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Shadows shifted in ways that didn't make sense. And that's when I noticed movement at the edges of my vision. Something darting between the vines, too quick to be human, too purposeful to be an animal. "Did you see that?" I whispered, gripping my rifle tighter. James laughed nervously. "Probably just a deer. Relax." But his voice wavered, betraying a flicker of doubt. Harold didn't answer. He just moved ahead, scanning, listening, every step measured. The feeling in the air had changed. It wasn't just the vines or the cries. It was the way the woods seemed to shift, responding to us, guiding us deeper into their grip. Then I heard it again, a scream, but different this time. Closer, sharper, ragged. It echoed between the trees, bouncing off the trunks, winding through the kudzu. It wasn't a child, not entirely. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched and broken, calling for help. Something primal stirred in me, an instinct older than reason. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee. But curiosity, stubborn, stupid, human curiosity, pulled me forward. We followed the sound, stepping over roots, ducking under thick curtains of vines. The deeper we went, the more the light diminished, until the world became green and shadowed, and the cries seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, my ears straining to catch the next sound. James tried to lead, but even he was slowing. Harold muttered under his breath, "This doesn't feel right." And he was right. Nothing about the woods felt right anymore. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed irrelevant. Every bend in the vine-covered path looked the same as the last. I couldn't tell which direction we had come from. The cries had stopped, but now every rustle, every whisper of wind through leaves sounded like a voice. I began to doubt my own senses. I knew the logical explanation. Maybe someone was lost, maybe an animal had mimicked a human call, but the terror settled deep in my gut. It wasn't fear of getting lost. It was the sense that something was watching, waiting, and we were intruders. We paused at a small clearing, a break in the kudzu where the ground was bare and dry. I leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath, listening to the forest. That's when I noticed it. The temperature. A subtle drop, almost imperceptible, but enough to make goosebumps rise along my arms. The air was too still, too heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then faintly, I heard a knock, or maybe a tap, repetitive, slow, somewhere deeper in the vines. I looked at James and Harold, but neither of them seemed to notice. I felt a cold dread wrap around me, tightening like the vines themselves. "Did you hear that?" I asked, voice barely audible. James shook his head. "It's nothing, just the wind or a branch." But it wasn't nothing. The tapping grew louder, echoing in the hollow space between the thick vines. My mind raced. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave this cursed tangle of green and shadow. Yet the thought of the woman's voice, her cries for help, kept me rooted. I couldn't abandon her, couldn't ignore the helplessness that threaded through the forest air. Harold finally spoke, his voice low, careful. "We shouldn't go further. This place, it's not natural. There's something here, Clara. I can feel it." I wanted to argue, to rationalize, but the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. And for the first time, I felt the vulnerability that comes from standing in a place where the rules of the world no longer apply. We turned back, but the forest had changed. The paths were unfamiliar. The kudzu seemed denser, more oppressive. Every step felt like an effort, like the vines themselves resisted our movement. The cries hadn't returned, but the sensation of being hunted had. I remember looking at James, seeing him pale, realizing we all felt the same primal fear. And I knew then that the woman had never been there. Or if she had, she was gone. Taken by the darkness, swallowed by the green that had become something alive, something aware. My rational mind tried to deny it, tried to tell me we were imagining things, but the echoes of her screams lingered, ringing in my head, refusing to let go. By the time we broke free of the thick kudzu and returned to our truck, the sun had dipped below the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the field, and the forest behind us seemed to sigh, almost as if it had exhaled, satisfied. None of us spoke for a long while. The fear didn't vanish with daylight. It stayed, a shadow in our chests, a weight on our shoulders. I didn't return to Rabun County for years. Even now, decades later, I can still feel the sticky air of the kudzu, hear the faint echoes of that desperate voice calling through the vines. It taught me something fundamental. Fear is not just a reaction. It's a guide, a warning. That day, I learned to listen to it, to respect it, and never to ignore the subtle signs the world gives when something is wrong. Some stories don't have resolution. Some cries go unanswered, but they stay with you, shaping you, reminding you that the world is wider, stranger, and darker than you ever imagined. And sometimes that's enough to keep you alive. Even as we drove away, my mind refused to settle. The truck's headlights cut swaths through the early night, but the shadows seemed to stretch, to cling to the edges of the road. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a movement in the darkness, a figure emerging from the kudzu like smoke from a fire. James muttered something about finding another hunting spot next time, but his voice lacked conviction. Harold stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles shone white. The forest behind us seemed endless, as if it could reach out and pull us back in. That night, back in the cabin we had rented, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind rattling the old windows, imagining the vines creeping through the cracks, reaching for me. I kept replaying the screams in my mind, trying to locate the exact pitch, the cadence, the desperation in that voice. It was a human sound, unmistakably, but every memory of it now carried a distortion, as if the forest had pressed itself into the sound, warping it. Even in my imagination, it was impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke to the smell of damp leaves and rotting wood drifting through the cabin. I stepped outside, hoping the sunlight would burn away the lingering fear. But the woods had a new presence. Silent, watchful, like it had marked me and was waiting. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, that the fear had bloomed in the shadows of the night. But my instincts screamed differently. There was something there. Something I had brushed against, something I could feel lingering just beyond the edges of my vision. We tried to go back into the field, rationalizing it as checking the area for whatever or whoever had called out. Maybe someone had wandered in and gotten lost. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was a voice trapped in the tangle of kudzu and someone needed help. But as soon as we neared the edge of the vine-choked forest, the oppressive air returned. My chest tightened. The forest didn't just exist. It weighed, it pressed, it watched. Harold stopped, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We're not going back in there," he said quietly, but firmly. "Something's wrong, Clara. You felt it last night. Don't fight it." I wanted to argue. My desire to find the woman or to understand what had happened battled with the gnawing dread in my chest. But Harold's eyes, dark and steady, held a warning I could not ignore. I nodded, though my heart continued to pound, the echoes of that scream still ringing in my ears. By noon, we had returned to the town, seeking answers, but the locals were reluctant to speak. The few who did mention the kudzu and the old stories spoke in hushed tones, as though merely acknowledging them might awaken something sleeping. "People hear things," one elderly man said. "Screams, voices. Sometimes they find nothing. Sometimes, well, some folks just disappear." He shook his head, his gnarled fingers twisting a coffee cup as if the act would steady him. "The vines take what they want. That's all I can say." I left the cafe with a hollow feeling in my stomach. Something had been there, something beyond understanding, and yet no evidence remained. No footprints, no sound, nothing tangible. The kudzu had swallowed its secret whole. That's the thing about fear you can't explain. It lingers, unyielding, insistent. I tried to push it aside as we drove away, but every turn of the wheel seemed to echo that haunting cry, the sharp pleading of a human voice trapped in a place where humans should never go. Years later, I would reflect on that day and realize that the fear I experienced wasn't just about the unknown lurking in the kudzu. It was about my own denial, the arrogance of thinking I could confront the wilderness on my own terms. We think we're prepared for nature because we carry rifles, maps, and flashlights. But fear, real fear, isn't about animals or terrain. It's about the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The instinct that tells you to turn back, the voice whispering that something is wrong, and our stubbornness that convinces us to ignore it. The screams stayed with me. At night, when the wind carries through the trees around my home, I sometimes imagine that same voice echoing through unseen corridors of green. It's not a memory of sound alone. It's a memory of tension, of the impossible stillness that preceded it, of the vines pressing close like hands in the dark. I realize now that the forest in Rabun County wasn't just a backdrop for the story. It was a character, alive in its own right, a force that could shift perception, twist reality, and teach harsh lessons about respect and attention. I returned to Rabun County only once after that, several years later, driven by a need for closure, perhaps to confront the fear that had shaped me. The kudzu had grown denser, almost impossibly so, and the forest floor had shifted in ways that defied logic. I stayed at the edge this time, observing, resisting the urge to enter, From a safe distance, I could see the folds of green stretching for acres, the sun barely touching the earth beneath. The wind carried faint sounds, rustling leaves that seemed to murmur in rhythm with my heartbeat. And for a moment, I felt the forest's awareness, as though it remembered me. That day, I understood something fundamental about fear, about horror, and about the human heart. Fear is a teacher, relentless but honest. It will confront you with your own arrogance, your denial, your inability to respect forces beyond comprehension. The screams in the kudzu were never meant to be solved. They were warnings. Warnings that some places exist outside our understanding, and that our instinct, that small, gnawing intuition, is sometimes the only compass we possess. I tell this story now because I've come to value fear not as terror, but as insight. It reveals, it teaches. It forces you to pay attention to the subtle shifts, the drop in temperature, the unfamiliar sound, the way shadows move against the natural order. We ignore these signs at our own peril. I survived that day, but the forest, the vines, and the voice remain part of me, etched into memory with a clarity that will never fade. I carry it like a map of warning signs, a guide to navigating not just the woods, but life itself. Sometimes people ask me if I ever found out who the woman was or what truly caused the cries. I don't have answers, and I've realized that seeking them misses the point. The story isn't about resolution, it's about recognition, about listening, about understanding that some events in life are beyond control, and that fear, though uncomfortable and suffocating, can save you if you heed it. The screams in the kudzu reminded me that vigilance, humility, and respect are as important as courage, that they are inseparable in the presence of forces we cannot dominate. Even now, when I walk in quiet woods, I listen. I notice the way the wind shifts, how the shadows fall, how a sudden rustle can carry meaning. I have learned to honor that instinct, to acknowledge the warning signs that our rational minds so often dismiss. It is a lesson that the kudzu, the hidden voice, and the Rabun County forest gifted me, a reminder that the world is stranger, wilder, and more alive than we are often willing to admit. And though I never return beyond the edge, I carry that forest with me, an unspoken presence in my life. It reminds me that fear is not weakness, but clarity, that listening to instinct, to surroundings, to the cries that echo through impossible places is a form of survival. And sometimes survival isn't just about escaping danger. It's about seeing the world clearly, truly, and with humility. So if there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it is that the world often whispers before it shouts. It offers subtle signs, quiet voices, and fleeting hints of danger. We may not understand them, we may not even believe them, but ignoring them can have consequences we cannot imagine. The kudzu hides more than earth and roots. It hides lessons, warnings, and sometimes, perhaps, lost souls. And though I never saw her again, the memory of her screams continues to guide me, a reminder that attentiveness, humility, and respect are the only tools we truly possess when confronting the unknown. I remember driving away that night, feeling the tension in my shoulders slowly release, yet knowing a part of me would always remain in Rabun County. In the end, the forest didn't take me, not physically, but it shaped me in ways more profound than any hunt, any adventure, any choice I had made before. The screams in the kudzu taught me to listen, to honor instinct, and to recognize that some mysteries are meant not to be solved but to be respected. And that, perhaps, is the truest lesson of all. I wake to the hush of the Appalachian night, a silence so thick it presses against my chest like a living weight. The clock above the counter in the small general store ticks insistently, each second a measured heartbeat in a world that seems to have stopped. I'm Robert, 28, and I've lived in Harlan, Kentucky, my whole life, though tonight I feel as if I've stepped into a town I barely know. The smell of pine smoke drifts faintly from the hills outside, mixing with the lingering scent of fried bacon from the diner down the road, yet even familiar smells feel off, tainted like the air itself is holding its breath. It's just past midnight. I'm alone behind the counter, the fluorescent lights flickering occasionally, casting long, trembling shadows across the dusty shelves. The town feels asleep, but I can't shake the sense that someone, or something, is watching. A few nights ago, Old Man Calloway swore he saw figures moving on Main Street in the dark, a line of people. And that's why I keep glancing at the windows, straining for a movement that might not be there. I tell myself I'm imagining things. My instincts scream otherwise, but I shove the feeling down, focusing on stacking cans and sweeping the floor. I've learned long ago that in a small town like Harlan, nerves can play tricks on you. The wind whispers through the cracks in the walls, and I swear it carries voices, but when I strain to listen, the sound dissolves into static like a radio between stations. Then I see it, a movement on Main Street, faint, blurred by the distance, yet unmistakable. Figures, walking slowly in a line, exactly one after the other, evenly spaced and utterly silent. There's no rustle of clothing, no footsteps on the asphalt, no shifting of shadows under the dim streetlights. I freeze, my broom clattering to the floor. My heart hammers in my chest as I peer closer. Their faces, I can't see their faces, not a single feature. Just blankness, like smooth porcelain, and yet they're alive, or something like life. I rub my eyes, blink, tell myself the heat of the store and the fatigue are making me see things. But the line doesn't vanish. It moves with the slow, deliberate cadence of a funeral march, as if the town itself is guiding them. I want to call out, but my throat is dry, locked by a fear I can't name. The lights flicker again, and for a moment I think one of the figures has turned toward me. But no, its head tilts slightly, just a whisper of movement, and then it continues down Main Street, silent, faceless, unbroken. My instincts scream at me to leave, to shut the door, bolt it, and never look back. But something, curiosity, disbelief, a foolish desire to witness, keeps me glued to the window. The street is quiet aside from the faint hum of the night insects. Yet this line, this silent parade, moves with a rhythm that does not belong to the natural world. The hairs on my arms prick. A chill crawls up my spine. I reach for the phone to call someone, but the line is dead. No dial tone, no static, just dead silence. I drop the receiver and it bangs against the cradle. The sound echoes in the store like a gunshot. Outside, the figures are closer now. I can't make out their clothing, just the way they move, fluid, inhuman, but eerily purposeful. Each step seems to absorb the sound around it, leaving a vacuum of quiet in their wake. I stumble back from the window, shaking. My mind races, grasping for reason. Maybe it's a hallucination, a trick of the dim streetlights and my exhaustion. Maybe old Calloway was right, and some dark thing haunts this town, creeping silently when everyone else sleeps. A thought gnaws at me. These figures aren't human. Or if they were, the humans I know don't move like that. Then a sound. Just a soft, low whisper, almost inaudible, coming from the street. I can't place the words, maybe there are none, but it's as if the air itself is speaking, hissing a warning. My pulse surges. I consider running, but my legs feel rooted to the floor. Fear, heavy and suffocating, coils around my lungs. I hear another whisper, and it seems closer, coming from inside the store now. I whirl around. Nothing. Just shadows dancing across the walls cast by the flickering fluorescent light. I remember my father's words from years ago when he warned me about listening too closely to the town's quiet. Some nights, he said, the silence isn't empty. It's full of things that don't belong in the light of day. I didn't understand then. Tonight, I understand all too well. I understand that the silence can watch you, follow you, follow you, guide you toward things your mind refuses to accept. I glance back at the window. The line is gone, vanished as if it was never there. My breath hitches. The street is empty. I can't even see a trace of movement. No footprints in the dust, no flicker of shadow. My rational mind races to explain it away. Shadows of trees, tricks of the light. My imagination run wild. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know the fear in my chest is not just imagination. It is truth, raw and primal. For the next few minutes or hours, it feels impossible to tell. I wander the store, checking doors and windows, listening to the night for any sound. Nothing comes. No echo of footsteps, no whisper, just the normal quiet that now feels impossibly alien. My hands tremble as I wipe down counters, my eyes flicking to every shadow, every flicker of light. I can't stop thinking about those faces, faceless yet unmistakably watching, faceless yet strangely familiar in their movement, like a distorted memory of people I should know. Finally, as the first hint of dawn tints the sky, I step outside. The street is calm, bathed in the pale light of morning. I see the cracks in the asphalt, the faded lines, the quiet houses. Nothing else. No evidence of the parade, no imprint of the inexplicable. I feel a strange mix of relief and lingering terror. Whatever I witnessed, it didn't leave a trace in the world, but it left one in me. That night changed me. I no longer question the quiet. I no longer trust my rational mind to shield me from what waits in the dark corners of this town. Fear, I learned, is not just about danger you can see. It's about the invisible, the unknown, the quiet truth that slips past reason and lodges itself in your mind. And sometimes, fear comes without sound, without warning, a silent parade that moves through your world at midnight, leaving only dread in its wake. I return to my routines, but I carry that night with me. Every creak in a floorboard, every whisper of wind through the hills, every shadow that seems just a little too still, reminds me that Harlan holds secrets that even time cannot erase. I share this story not because I want to scare you, though I cannot deny it will, but because I learned something vital that night. Trust your instincts, notice the whispers in the silence, and never dismiss the quiet when it feels wrong. Fear is a guide, and sometimes it is the only one that will lead you safely through a world that is not as it seems. Days after that night, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. The faces, or lack thereof, the silent, purposeful movement, the way the darkness seemed to bend around them as if it were alive. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw them again, like a film looping endlessly. Even during the day, the town seemed different. Shadows clung longer to the corners of buildings, alleys seemed narrower, and the wind carried whispers that weren't there before. I tried to convince myself it was all fear taking root, but fear doesn't leave a mark this deep. Something had marked me, etched itself into the way I perceived the world. I kept returning to the store each night, almost against my own will. There was a compulsion in me, a need to see if it would happen again, as though confronting the unknown would somehow strip it of its power. On the third night, at exactly 12:17 a.m., I was stocking shelves when the sensation returned, a subtle vibration in the air, a pressure that made the hairs on my neck stand on end. I froze, letting the silence settle around me like a thick fog. At first, I saw nothing. Then, from the corner of my eye, a movement along Main Street. I blinked. My heart started hammering, and I felt a cold sweat prickling down my back. There they were again. The line, faceless, silent, moving with the same deliberate cadence. But this time, I noticed something different. The streetlights flickered in rhythm with them, as if acknowledging their passage. And something else. I felt the air itself shift around me, a kind of suffocating presence that pressed against my chest, threatening to pull me forward. I wanted to scream, to run outside, to shake myself from this nightmare. But my legs betrayed me. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and fascination. The first figure stopped at the corner of the street closest to my store. It didn't look in my direction, but I could feel its attention as surely as if it were a gaze, heavy and oppressive. I realized then that these weren't people, at least not in any way I could comprehend. Their existence seemed to occupy a space between reality and something else, something that shouldn't exist, and yet here it was. A whisper floated through the air, almost imperceptible. Not a voice I could recognize, not a language I understood, but a warning, a threat, and an invitation all at once. My instincts screamed at me to hide, to cover my eyes and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But something inside me refused. I wanted to understand. I wanted to confront the darkness instead of fleeing from it, and that choice, the small act of defiance, would define what came next. I stepped toward the window. Each movement felt amplified, echoing in the quiet like thunder. The line didn't flinch. It continued down Main Street, each step precise, each figure perfectly aligned with the next. I realized I could count them now, 15 in total, and with each one, my pulse quickened. Something about their formation felt ritualistic, deliberate, as if they were moving toward an unseen goal, and the air around me seemed to hum with anticipation. Suddenly, a figure broke from the line. It came closer to the store, gliding rather than walking. I could see the smoothness of its faceless head, the emptiness where eyes should have been. A shiver ran through me, not entirely of fear, but of recognition, as though I had known this being my entire life without ever meeting it. I staggered back, nearly falling, but the urge to look again overcame my panic. It stopped at the edge of the street, just outside the glow of the flickering streetlight. For a heartbeat, I thought it might speak, move, even acknowledge me. Then, as abruptly as it appeared, it turned and rejoined the line. The parade continued down the street, vanishing around a corner in perfect silence. I was left standing there, drenched in sweat, trembling, my mind a storm of disbelief and awe. I realized then that the line wasn't just a ghostly procession. It was a message, a mirror of the town's hidden history. Harlan had secrets, dark and unspoken, that lingered in the folds of the night. And somehow these faceless figures were tied to them, carrying them down Main Street in an eternal march that no living soul could interrupt. The following morning, I tried to share my experience with someone. I told my neighbor, an older woman named Elsie, who had lived in Harlan longer than anyone. She paused mid-sentence while I recounted every detail. Her eyes went wide, and then she shook her head slowly. "You saw them," she said quietly. "The silent parade. It's been happening since before I was born. People just stop noticing after a while. They walk, they disappear, and they keep moving year after year. Some say it's the souls of the town's lost. Some say it's a warning. But no one dares to talk about it in the daylight." Her words should have terrified me further, but instead they gave shape to the dread I had been carrying. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining things. There was a truth here, buried under decades of silence and fear. And the realization that this truth existed beyond my comprehension didn't weaken me. It made me resolve to witness it fully, to understand the depth of what Harlan hid in its quiet streets. That night I returned again, bracing myself for the line. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a mixture of excitement and terror that made every heartbeat feel like an explosion. And once more, they appeared. 15 figures, silent and faceless, moving with the same slow precision. I watched from the shadows of my store, not daring to breathe, feeling the air thickening, almost tangible, with their passage. Something new happened that night, something that changed everything. One of the figures, a smaller one, perhaps younger, paused at the corner near my store. Unlike the others, it seemed aware of me. I could feel it studying me, probing the space between us. And then it raised a hand, not threatening, not menacing, but a gesture of acknowledgement, of recognition. I felt a chill that wasn't entirely fear, something deeper, more profound. It was as if I had been invited into their world, even if only briefly. And then, just as quickly, the figure lowered its hand and rejoined the line. The parade moved on, silent as ever, fading into the darkness around the bend. I stood frozen for long minutes, absorbing what had just happened. My heart pounded, but now it carried not just fear, but understanding. I realized the parade was not just a terror, it was a reflection, a reminder of life and death, memory and loss, carried through the streets of Harlan by forces that defied explanation. The weeks that followed were different. I no longer feared the silence, nor the shadows, nor the faceless figures that walked the streets at midnight. I learned to listen, to the wind, to the faint whispers, to the rhythm of the town itself. And in that listening, I found clarity. I understood that fear is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is a guide, leading you to truths you cannot see in the daylight. I share this now, years later, because the memory of that night has never left me. I live my life differently, more aware, more attuned to the subtle signs of the world around me. Harlan taught me that reality is thinner than we believe, that the veil between the known and the unknown is fragile, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand and witness it anyway. If you ever find yourself in a quiet town, when the night presses close and the world seems still, pay attention. Trust your instincts. Listen to the silence. And if you are brave enough, you might glimpse the silent parade at midnight. You might feel it pass beside you, faceless, patient, eternal. And in that moment, you will know something profound, that fear can illuminate, that the unseen can teach, and that the world holds mysteries far beyond the grasp of our reasoning. I cannot say I have all the answers. I cannot explain why they appear or why they vanish without a trace. But I know this. What I saw in Harlan changed me forever. It taught me to embrace the unknown, to face the invisible with eyes wide open, and to honor the quiet truths that whisper to us when the rest of the world sleeps. And that, perhaps, is the real gift of the silent parade. A terrifying, beautiful reminder that even in our most ordinary lives, the extraordinary waits just beyond perception, moving silently, patiently, endlessly through the night. I still remember the first time I felt that gnawing unease crawl up my spine, the kind that makes your stomach knot and your heartbeat betray your thoughts. My name is Lucas. I was 22 at the time, and I thought I knew what it meant to be cautious. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. It was the summer of 2015, and my friend Mara and I decided to escape the stifling city for the mountains of Watauga County. College life had left us restless, and the stories of isolated trails and hidden cabins whispered like promises, pulling us towards something that felt alive, something that demanded to be experienced. The drive up was deceptive. The sun slanted through the dense pines, painting the forest floor in gold and shadow, and we joked like nothing could touch us. The air smelled of damp earth and crushed leaves, a perfume of something untouched by the chaos of civilization. Our plan was simple: hike a trail a few miles off the main road, spend a night in an old cabin we'd rented from a local we'd never met, and return by morning. But there's a difference between what you plan and what actually unfolds, and I learned that difference the hard way. We arrived as the light was softening into that murky, golden gray that hints at evening. The cabin was unremarkable at first glance: wooden, slightly crooked, nestled in a grove of pines. A small porch jutted out toward the forest, and the air was thick, almost syrupy, with the scent of wet wood. We unloaded our packs and laughed at how small it looked, how perfect it seemed for a night of solitude. Mara, with her dark hair catching the last rays of sun, insisted on sleeping on the porch, claiming she wanted to feel the forest breathe around her. I laughed, agreeing to stay inside, thinking it would keep me safe, closer to the windows, closer to light. Night fell with a velocity that surprised me. The trees around the cabin grew inky and oppressive, their branches scratching at the sky like skeletal fingers. Somewhere in the distance, an animal called, a sound half human, half coyote, that made me pause mid-step. I told myself it was nothing, just the forest playing tricks, but that first tug of dread was honest. We set up our sleeping bags, and Mara hummed quietly, trying to fill the empty air with something familiar, something human. I tried to match her energy, forcing myself to relax, but the shadows around the cabin seemed to breathe in ways that I couldn't rationalize. Hours passed. I drifted in and out of a restless sleep, the wind carrying the whispers of the forest inside the cabin. That's when I noticed it. The windows. From where I was lying, I could see them just out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was the wind pressing against the panes. But then I realized they weren't just shut, they were barricaded, each one jammed with something from the inside, something that hadn't been there when we arrived. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My instincts screamed at me to wake Mara, to leave, to run. But there was a hesitation, the internal conflict that comes from disbelief. Could this be a prank? Could I have imagined it? Rationalization whispered in my ear, maybe it's old locks, the way cabins settle. I stepped onto the porch to check. The air was cooler here, biting at my exposed arms. The moon cast fractured shadows across the wooden boards, and I noticed the smell, Smoke, faint but unmistakable, drifting from somewhere in the dark. My pulse quickened. The barricades didn't make sense. We had left everything outside when we went to sleep. No one else could have done this without us noticing. My rational mind, my careful, analytical self, wanted to cling to explanations. Branches fallen, wind-blown debris, a trick of the moonlight. But my gut knew differently, that insidious, primal knowing that tells you when something is off. I shook Mara awake. Her eyes, usually bright with humor, were clouded with confusion and fear. "Lucas, what is it?" she whispered. I gestured toward the windows. Her face paled as recognition settled in. The sound of the wind through the trees seemed to amplify, like the forest itself was aware of our realization. We tried the doors. All of them were locked from the inside. We hadn't touched them, and yet each one refused to budge. The cabin had trapped us in the most impossible, surreal way. That's when panic began to creep in, slow and deliberate. Not the kind that bursts and fades, but the kind that seeps into your bones, turns your blood cold, and makes every small sound a threat. I could hear Mara breathing sharply beside me, and the floorboards beneath us seemed to hum with tension. I pressed my hands against the door, feeling the solid wood that shouldn't have been able to resist our strength. A memory surfaced. Campfire stories, warnings about the isolated mountains, tales locals told visitors who disappeared for hours, sometimes days. And I realized with a sinking clarity that we were inside one of those stories now. Hours blurred. We whispered, trying to reassure each other, trying to find reason in the absurdity. The forest outside had a life of its own. Branches scraping like nails across glass, the call of that half-human, half-animal sound echoing endlessly. I noticed shadows moving against the thin walls, and for a fleeting second I swore I saw someone, or something, watching us. Mara wanted to leave through the back door, but it too refused to give way. Each barricade seemed deliberate, almost sentient, a silent judgment on our presence. Fear became a tactile thing. The air felt thick, pressing against our lungs, and the temperature seemed to fluctuate, cold gusts snaking along the floorboards, while pockets of warmth suffocated in other corners. I could feel my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs, each thump a cruel reminder of how alive we were, and how vulnerable. We moved cautiously, testing walls, checking for any hidden mechanism, any explanation. But there was nothing, only the oppressive, smothering certainty that the cabin had taken control. And then came the sound, the knocking, slow at first, tentative, as if testing us, then more insistent, echoing from inside the cabin, not the windows, not the doors, but the walls themselves. Mara clutched my arm, whispering, "Lucas, we need to get out." I nodded, though I didn't know where we could go. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every door and window betrayed us. I felt the struggle inside me, the rational part, the analytical part, still seeking a logical explanation, and the primal part, screaming that we were no longer in control. By the early hours of dawn, the tension had hollowed us out. Sleep was impossible, rest unattainable. The forest outside had quieted, but the cabin's grip on us remained. Then, as if deciding we had endured enough, the doors clicked. They weren't just unlocked, they swung open slowly, almost ceremoniously, revealing the morning light that had crept into the world unnoticed. The barricades were gone, the windows unblocked. We didn't question it, we didn't pause. We fled, stumbling down the trail with the first rays of sunlight cutting through the forest like judgment. Even now, I think about that night, about the way the cabin had seemed alive, aware, and waiting, about the internal conflict, the tug-of-war between logic and instinct. I learned something vital that night. Fear isn't just a response, it's a guide. It teaches you to listen, to notice, to respect the boundaries of the unknown. And sometimes survival isn't about understanding. It's about moving when the world itself refuses to wait for explanation. I think back to Mara, still humming softly despite her terror, and I realize that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the persistence of will, the refusal to let dread paralyze you, the ability to step forward even when the environment itself conspires against you. The mountains of Watauga County were not villains, but guardians of their own secrets, and we, intruders in their story, learn to honor that mystery, to respect the silent rules that shape a world beyond our control. Even as the sunlight stretched across the forest floor, warming the damp earth and glinting off the leaves, the memory of the night weighed on me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Mara and I didn't speak much as we descended the narrow trail, our movements automatic, our minds still entangled in disbelief. Each snapped twig and rustling leaf made me flinch, a reminder that what we had endured was not simply the product of imagination. It had been real, tactile, suffocating, and inexplicably intelligent. The woods, which had seemed inviting just hours before, now pressed in on all sides with an almost punitive intensity, as if judging us for our trespass. When we finally reached the edge of the trail near the road, the normal world, the one with cars and strangers and sunlight that didn't threaten, seemed almost foreign. I realized then how fragile our sense of safety had been, how easily it could be disrupted by forces we don't understand. Mara laughed nervously, a short, breathless sound that made my chest tighten. "I feel like I've been in a dream," she said. But dreams don't leave splinters under your nails, don't leave your heart racing hours later, and don't leave you with the insistent whisper that something was still watching. Back in the city, the world appeared impossibly mundane. Traffic moved, dogs barked, and the coffee shop smelled the same as ever. But I felt a quiet dissonance, an internal trembling that refused to settle. The cabin had changed me. I found myself questioning everything I once took for granted: locks, doors, the illusion of control. I kept replaying the events in my mind, searching for the logic I was denied in the forest. The walls that had held us, the knocks that had echoed through the night, the air that had thickened like water around us, all of it refused to yield to reason. And yet, amid the terror, a subtle clarity had emerged. Instinct matters. Fear matters. The smallest hunch, the faintest tug of unease, can be a lifeline when reality bends in ways we cannot explain. Weeks passed, but the memory remained vivid. I found myself drawn back to the mountains, this time not to challenge them, but to understand them. I researched local legends, spoke to residents of Watauga County, and learned of travelers who had experienced similar inexplicable events: doors locking themselves, windows barricading mysteriously, sounds that could not be traced to any animal or human. There was no consensus, no explanation that satisfied the rational mind, only a quiet acceptance. The mountains have boundaries, some of which we are not meant to cross uninvited. And within those boundaries, fear is a teacher, guiding the cautious, punishing the reckless. One afternoon, I returned to the trail, not the cabin, not the exact location, but the forest itself. The air was rich with pine and moss, the sunlight flickering through the canopy in the way it always had, yet it felt different. The forest felt more aware, less forgiving, more deliberate. I walked slowly, listening. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the soft swish of branches overhead, the distant calls of unseen birds, they all seemed to hold messages if I could only interpret them. I realized that night in the cabin hadn't been punishment, it had been instruction. It had forced me to notice the nuances of the environment, to respect its rhythms, and to trust the instincts I had so often dismissed. Mara and I never spoke much about the cabin again, at least not in detail. There was an unspoken agreement between us, a recognition that some experiences are too fragile to dissect, too raw to recount fully without losing the essence. Yet, the experience bonded us in ways I cannot articulate, creating a silent understanding, a shared memory of survival and awakening. I noticed subtle changes in myself. I was more attuned to my surroundings, more cautious in ways that didn't inhibit life, but enhanced it, more willing to listen to that inner voice that speaks when reason falls short. Fear, I realized, is not weakness. It is a compass pointing to truth we cannot always see. Several months later, I found myself in a small seminar at the university, giving a presentation about personal safety and risk awareness for students who, like me, sought adventure in the unknown. I recounted stories, not the cabin itself, not in specifics, but the lessons it imparted. The importance of trusting your instincts, the subtle signs that precede danger, the way the world often communicates in whispers before shouting. The students listened, rapt, and I could see recognition in their eyes. Fear, when understood and respected, does not paralyze. It illuminates paths through the dark. And for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose emerge from my ordeal. Even now, years later, the cabin and the night it locked itself remain vivid in my mind. I can close my eyes and feel the shift in the air, the weight of the walls, the almost imperceptible rhythm of the forest outside. I remember Mara's quiet humming, the soft thump of my own heartbeat, and the relentless insistence of the knocks that came from nowhere. And I smile, because in that fear, I found clarity, resilience, and a profound respect for the boundaries that define our world. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the conscious decision to move forward despite it, to honor your instincts, even when reason whispers otherwise. Sometimes I still dream of the cabin. In these dreams, it waits, not as a malevolent entity, but as a guardian of lessons learned, a sentinel of the unseen forces that shape our lives. The doors and windows, once barriers, are now reminders that we cannot always control our environment, but we can control our response to it. Fear, when faced, becomes a teacher. Isolation, a mirror. The unknown, a canvas upon which we project our deepest understanding of courage. And this is why I tell the story now. Not to terrify, not to boast, not to revel in the impossible. I tell it to remind anyone who ventures into the unknown that awareness is survival, intuition is guidance, and courage is a choice. We live in a world that constantly tests us, not always with grand gestures or dramatic threats, but with subtle signs, whispered warnings, and moments that demand we pay attention. The cabin in Watauga County, the night it locked itself around us, was one of those moments. It was a crucible, shaping who I am today, teaching me to trust, to notice, to respect, and to act. I carry that lesson into every corner of my life, in relationships, in work, in the quiet moments when the world seems calm but carries undercurrents we cannot see. Fear is not something to run from. It is something to recognize, to understand, and to let guide you toward wisdom. Mara and I learned that in the mountains, surrounded by shadows and silence, and though the cabin is gone now, the imprint of its lesson remains indelible. When you hear stories like this, true, strange, unnerving, remember that they are more than entertainment. They are invitations to listen, to observe, and to respect the spaces we enter. Sometimes the scariest thing is not what waits for you outside, but what you ignore within. Trust your instincts. Notice the subtle signs. Move with intention, and when fear rises, don't fight it. Understand it, honor it, and let it guide you toward clarity, resilience, and courage. The mountains of Watauga County are patient. They watch, they wait, they teach. And in their shadows, I found not only terror but awakening, not only danger but insight, and not only fear but the courage to face the unknown. The cabin that locked itself was a vessel, a teacher, a reminder that some experiences are beyond explanation, but within them, the human spirit can discover its truest strength. I tell this story not because I want anyone to be afraid, but because I want them to be aware, to listen to the whispers of the world, to trust the instincts that rise in moments of uncertainty, and to recognize that survival and courage are intertwined, woven through the quiet acknowledgement of what we cannot yet understand. Mara and I walked out of that forest alive, shaken, and forever changed. And it is that transformation, that delicate balance of fear and insight that I carry forward and that I hope others can carry too. I never thought a place like Kanawha County, West Virginia could feel so alive, so conscious. I'm Marcus, 27 at the time. Just a truck driver passing through, chasing long hauls and empty highways, with nothing more on my mind than the hum of the diesel and the solitude of the road. I liked the quiet, the way silence stretched over asphalt and forests like a soft blanket, hiding things you didn't need to see. But Paint Creek Trail was different. The first time I drove past it, I didn't even know the trail existed. I just noticed a narrow path snaking into the dense Appalachian forest, a thin line swallowed by the trees. Locals had told me stories in the diner near Elkview, but I thought they were just the usual sleepy town superstition. Stories to scare children and tourists alike. I was wrong. I came back to Kanawha County that October, the air heavy with damp leaves and the sharp tang of wood smoke. There's something about the forest here. It doesn't just stand, it presses against you. That first evening, I parked at the trailhead, intending only a short walk, just to stretch my legs before heading back to the highway. My boots crunched on the dry leaves, a sound swallowed quickly by the thick canopy above. The sun was a low, bruised orange, bleeding into the horizon, and shadows began to fold in on themselves like they had weight. I had the uneasy feeling that the forest was watching. Not with eyes, but with intent, like it was waiting to see if I belonged. I told myself it was just nerves, the isolation playing tricks. But even as I said it, I noticed something odd. The air grew cooler, unnaturally so, and the wind carried a scent that made my stomach twist. Not rot, exactly, not decay, but like iron and wet earth, tinged with something I couldn't name, something animal, something wrong. The trail itself was narrow, barely wide enough for one person. The trees leaned in, nodding their branches like arthritic fingers across the sky. I kept thinking I saw movement just out of the corner of my eye, a branch snapping, a shadow sliding along the trunks. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. I laughed nervously to myself, trying to shake the dread creeping along my spine. But then I saw it, or at least I thought I did. At first it was just a silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, draped in darkness that seemed heavier than shadow, standing maybe 50 feet ahead. I froze, heart thundering, and when I blinked it seemed taller. Stretching, elongating, as if the space between us had stretched the figure like taffy. I shook my head, telling myself it was the fading light playing tricks, that my mind, tired from long drives, was filling in gaps. I started walking again, deliberately slower, not wanting to provoke anything I couldn't explain. Every step I took, the figure seemed to shift, not like it was moving toward me, but like it was adjusting to my perspective, growing taller, shorter, wider, thinner, depending on where I stood. I tried to talk myself down. Rational thought, logic, the same mantra truckers repeat when the night stretches too long, but the feeling in my gut refused. There was an intelligence here, a sentience. I was being measured, calculated. I thought of my father, who used to warn me about trusting stories of the unknown in places like this. He said the world was mostly simple, that monsters were only the ones humans created. I wanted to believe him, so I kept walking, forcing my legs to move, forcing my mind to focus on the crunch of leaves under my boots, the occasional bird call. But the bird calls began to change, sharp, irregular, sometimes mimicking the cadence of a human cough, or the uneven clatter of someone dragging their feet behind me. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I stopped. The forest seemed to exhale around me, a hollow, almost audible sigh that rattled the bones in my chest. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it was everywhere and nowhere. That's when I realized the figure wasn't just ahead of me anymore. I could feel its presence around me in my peripheral vision, in the shadows beneath the low-hanging branches. I turned quickly, scanning the trees, but there was nothing solid to anchor my eyes to. Just black shapes that bent the light, warped the air, that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly. I remember thinking, for the first time that evening, that maybe the stories weren't for children or tourists. Maybe they were warnings. Paint Creek Trail had a history, I later learned, older than the county itself. Settlers spoke of tall figures that roamed the woods, spirits or creatures that could change their shape, sometimes seen at dusk or dawn, always fleeting, always uncatchable. Locals called it the shifter. Some claimed it was a human, twisted by curses and old grief. Others whispered it was older than anything in the forests, a living shadow that survived off fear. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself this was coincidence and nerves, but the forest had made its point. The first real encounter happened when I heard my name, just my name, whispered, soft as the wind brushing through the pines. Marcus. It wasn't the wind. I froze. My breath caught. Marcus. The voice was closer, almost at my ear, and yet, when I turned, nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape, and that figure, was there again, 50 feet ahead, stretching impossibly tall. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs refused. My mind churned, trying to reason, trying to fight the panic that was curling around my spine like a living thing. I remembered my father's voice in my head again. Trust your instincts. That simple, stubborn advice. And my instincts screamed at me that I needed to leave. I took a step back, then another, careful not to break my gaze. But it was already too late. The moment I moved, the figure moved, not toward me exactly, but in perfect harmony with my retreat, always maintaining a distance, always changing shape. Sometimes tall and thin, sometimes hunched and wide, like it was testing my perception, challenging me to react. The trail seemed to close in, the trees leaning heavier with every step. The temperature dropped, a slow, creeping cold that sank through my jacket and into my bones. I could hear a scratching now, something soft, deliberate, like nails running over bark. I spun, catching a glimpse of a face. No, faces, shifting, melting, impossible geometry, and then nothing. My stomach turned, bile rising, but I swallowed it down, forced myself to breathe, counting each exhale, grounding myself in something real, something I could hold. I remembered the stories about leaving offerings, about leaving the woods respectfully, about not looking too long at the shifter. I didn't have an offering, nothing to placate whatever this thing was. All I had was my own fear and my own resolve. I started walking faster, not running because I didn't want to provoke it. My ears strained for the repetitive, irregular sounds that had been following me. The air smelled of wet leaves and iron, thick with tension. Every branch I passed seemed poised to strike, every shadow a potential trap. My chest burned with panic, yet I forced it down, letting the fear guide me rather than control me. And then, silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. My pulse roared in my ears. I stopped, convinced I had misjudged the trail, misjudged everything. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was waiting. And then I felt it. A brush against my arm. Light, almost feather-like, but it sent ice straight to my core. I whipped around, expecting to see the figure looming directly over me, but the space was empty. The hairs on my neck stood, my legs trembling, my mind spinning. It had touched me, but hadn't moved. It was testing boundaries, probing, and I had no defense. I kept walking, each step deliberate. My thoughts flickered between disbelief and horror. This forest was alive, yes, but the life within it wasn't human, wasn't natural. And yet, there was a lesson in it, something I had to learn if I wanted to leave unscathed. The shifter didn't attack. It observed, measured, taught fear in its purest form, the kind that made you confront yourself, confront every instinct you had ignored, every hesitation you had rationalized away. Eventually, the trail curved back toward the parking area. Light spilled through the trees in thin, dying slivers. I didn't look back until I was in my truck. Doors locked, engine running. The forest was silent again, but I could feel it, waiting, watching, still shifting. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove away, but a strange calm settled afterward. A lesson learned in fear and respect. Fear, I realized, wasn't something to fight. It was something to understand, to acknowledge. I returned home that night, but the memory lingered. Sometimes I dream of Paint Creek Trail, the shifting figure, the brush of air that was never wind. Sometimes I hear a whisper in the dark, my name, soft and deliberate. And I think about the people who told the stories in the diner, their knowing glances, their careful warnings. They weren't trying to scare me. They were preparing me, preparing anyone who wandered too close to the edges of what we can see, what we can rationalize. I learned to trust my instincts more after that night, not just in the woods, not just in Kanawha County, but in life. That strange, suffocating presence, the shifter on Paint Creek Trail, reminded me that some things exist beyond understanding, that fear is a teacher, and that sometimes the only way to survive is to recognize your own limits and respect the unknown. I couldn't sleep that night, not really. The truck was parked in my driveway back home, but the shadows seemed thicker than usual, clinging to the corners of the room like wet cloth. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining the forest pressing against the thin walls of my memory. Paint Creek Trail wasn't just a place I had walked through. It was a presence I carried with me, a weight on my chest that no pillow could lift. I tried to tell myself it was over, that the shifter was just an embodiment of the forest's isolation, a trick of light and imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. Something had brushed against me, something that knew the shape of my fear, the exact rhythm of my heartbeat. Days passed. I went about my usual routes, the hum of the highway, a temporary salve, the steady vibration of tires against asphalt grounding me. But whenever I closed my eyes, I was back on that trail. I could feel the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the low, almost imperceptible shifting of the figure in the distance. The more I tried to suppress the memory, the more vivid it became. I realized then that fear doesn't always leave when you escape. Sometimes it follows, trailing like a shadow that grows longer with every attempt to outrun it. Weeks later, curiosity, or perhaps stubbornness, drove me back. I told myself I needed closure, that if I faced Paint Creek Trail in daylight, with the sun piercing through the trees, I could exorcise the lingering dread. I arrived in the morning, the trail bathed in muted amber light, the mist lifting from the creek like vapor drawn from another world. Everything seemed ordinary at first. Birds called, a breeze stirred, leaves rustled. But I felt it again, the subtle tension in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. I stepped onto the trail, boots crunching softly, eyes scanning. There was no silhouette this time, no stretching figure, only shadows that bent unnaturally, like the trees themselves were leaning to watch me. I walked slowly, forcing myself to notice details. A rotting log that smelled faintly of iron, the pattern of frost on the leaves, the way sunlight fractured through the canopy. I told myself the shifter was gone, that it only appeared when I was unprepared, when fear allowed it to take shape. I told myself, but I couldn't fully believe it. And then the air shifted. That same unnatural chill ran over my skin, prickling my arms and neck. I froze. My heart thundered. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a branch cracked, soft and deliberate, and I heard it again, my name, whispered, curling around the edges of my awareness. Marcus. The voice wasn't angry or threatening. It was patient, deliberate, almost expectant. I swallowed, trying to ground myself. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't run. I had to confront it. I kept walking. The trail narrowed further and the shadows deepened. I remember feeling a pull, as if the forest itself were guiding me, urging me to step forward despite the fear clinging to my ribs. And then I saw it, not ahead this time, but around me. A ripple in the shadows, stretching and twisting, forming the vague shape of a man, then a beast, then something unrecognizable. It moved with fluidity, like smoke in the wind, always aware of my perspective, always adapting. I realized something crucial in that moment. The shifter wasn't hunting me. It wasn't trying to harm me. It was teaching me, testing me, forcing me to confront the fear I had tried to suppress. I'd always thought of fear as something to avoid, something that weakened me. But here in the whispering woods of Kanawha County, I understood. Fear was a tool. It sharpened my senses, focused my mind, forced me to pay attention to details I would normally ignore. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice trembling but steady. I see you. Silence, then a rustle like cloth brushing against bark. And then, in the corner of my vision, the figure shifted. Taller, thinner, almost impossibly elongated, yet somehow less threatening. It mirrored my movements, matched my breath, moved in harmony with me rather than against me. I understood then that it had always been this way. The shifter didn't attack because it didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to force awareness, to strip away complacency, to demand respect for the unknown. I continued along the trail, now observing instead of fearing. I noticed the small details, the way the creek water pooled in natural bowls reflecting the twisted branches above, the faint markings in the bark that could have been claw marks or just knots of growth, the way the wind carried scents that made my stomach twist, moss, wet earth, something metallic and sharp. Every sense was heightened. Every movement I made was deliberate. Every breath I took was a negotiation with the forest. And then, near the old stone bridge that locals had long warned travelers to avoid at night, I stopped. The figure appeared directly in front of me for the first time, fully formed, or at least as fully formed as it could ever be. Its height was impossible, its limbs long and slender, yet fluid. Its face was a blank mask, featureless, and yet I felt it staring straight into my mind. Fear surged, but I held my ground. I remembered my father's words, remembered the lessons I had learned on this trail. Trust your instincts, respect what you don't understand. Acknowledge fear, but do not surrender to it. I exhaled slowly, centering myself. I respect you, I said aloud. I understand now. The figure didn't respond in any conventional sense. It shifted, melting into the shadows, stretching tall, then short, then dissolving entirely into the trees. And then silence. Absolute silence. The forest no longer felt oppressive. The chill lifted slightly, the air felt lighter. The sun filtered through the canopy more evenly, and for the first time I could appreciate the trail not as a threat, but as a living, breathing entity. Strange, unknowable, but beautiful in its own way. I walked back to my truck, the tension in my shoulders easing with every step. Paint Creek Trail had tested me, exposed the edges of my fear and insecurity, and forced me to confront them. I realized something profound. Fear is not weakness. It is a teacher, a mirror, a guide. The shifter was not a monster in the sense we think of monsters. It was a reflection of awareness, a creature that demanded you confront yourself in the rawest way possible. Driving away from Kanawha County that day, I felt different. Not just relieved, but transformed. The fear that had followed me home weeks before had been replaced by respect and understanding. I knew that if I ever returned, the shifter would be there, always observing, always adapting, always teaching. But I would be ready. I would walk the trail with awareness, with careful observation, with acknowledgement of the limits and strengths I carried within me. Years have passed since that day. I tell this story not to scare, but to inspire. Life is full of unknown trails, of shadows that stretch in ways our minds cannot comprehend. Fear will always exist at the edges, whispering your name, challenging your assumptions, testing your resolve. But if you approach it as I learned to approach the shifter, deliberately, with respect, with awareness, you discover something extraordinary. You discover the edges of your courage, the depth of your perception, the power of listening to your own instincts. Even now, when I drive through West Virginia, I sometimes glance at the forest and feel the presence of that tall, dark figure. I don't feel fear the way I did before. I feel recognition. I feel a pulse of life that isn't human, that isn't fully comprehensible, and yet I understand that my survival, my growth, my awareness are all intertwined with respecting that unknown. Paint Creek Trail taught me something I could not have learned anywhere else. That the unknown isn't something to fear blindly, but something to engage with thoughtfully, courageously, and with humility. And so I carry that lesson with me every day. I carry it in the long stretches of highway where shadows bend oddly across the road, in the silence of truck stops where the hum of fluorescent lights can feel almost alive, in the quiet moments at home where the edges of perception feel sharper than usual. The shifter was more than a shadow on a trail. It was a revelation, a reminder that awareness, courage, and respect for what we cannot fully grasp are among the truest measures of strength. I look back on that night, on those chilling hours on Paint Creek Trail, and I feel gratitude for the fear, for the lessons, for the figure that forced me to confront myself. For anyone who walks a path unknown, who faces shadows that whisper your name, know this: fear is not your enemy. It is the trail itself, stretching before you, demanding attention, demanding courage. And if you listen, if you respect it, you emerge changed, stronger, wiser, more alive than you ever imagined. The shifter remains, somewhere in the depths of Kanawha County, a creature of shadow and perception, adapting endlessly, teaching endlessly. And I carry it with me, always, a silent companion, a guide through the unknown. I know now that the trail, the forest, the darkness, and the fear were never meant to destroy me. They were meant to awaken me. I drive away, engine rumbling, night descending, the stars just beginning to blink into existence, and I smile, knowing that I have walked the path that few dare to take, that I have faced the shifting shadow and lived not in terror, but in understanding. I have been tested, and I have emerged. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson Paint Creek Trail could ever offer. I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. The forest didn't look the same anymore. Even though I had walked these trails hundreds of times as a boy, the woods of Tigard Valley seemed alive in a way I had never noticed before. Shadows twisted in angles that didn't make sense, and the wind carried whispers that sounded eerily like voices, soft, deliberate, and just out of reach. My name is Samuel Carter. I was 12 years old at the time, and I lived on the edge of Randolph County, West Virginia. Those 3 days in the summer of 1973 changed me in ways I still feel to this day, the way a shadow clings to your skin long after the sun comes up. It started on a Thursday afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the dense pine ridges, turning the valleys into a quilt of gold and dark. I was walking home from school along the old logging road, my sneakers scuffed from climbing over roots and rocks, when I saw something, or someone, standing at the edge of the tree line. My heart nearly stopped. At first, I thought it was just a stranger, maybe a hiker from another town. But as I squinted through the fading light, I realized the figure was impossibly tall, with limbs that looked like branches, bark-like skin that blended into the surrounding forest. I should have turned and run then. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but some part of me, call it curiosity, call it foolishness, kept my feet planted. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its eyes on me, though it didn't have a face I could recognize. There was something profoundly wrong about the way it existed. I took a cautious step forward. The air around me grew heavy, thick with the smell of wet soil and decay, the forest floor giving off a scent that clung to my clothes, my hair, even my skin. Every nerve in my body screamed that I needed to get home, that the safety of my small farmhouse was the only thing keeping me grounded. I had always been told stories about the woods, old legends from my grandfather about creatures that wandered these hills, spirits of the land who punished those who strayed too far. I never believed them until that day. The thing at the tree line shifted slightly, just enough to remind me that it was alive. I blinked, and it was gone. My legs moved on autopilot. I ran the rest of the way home, the shadows of the trees stretching unnaturally long across the road, as though trying to reach out and pull me back. When I burst through the front door, I barely had time to catch my breath before my mother's voice called out from the kitchen. "Sam, what's wrong, honey?" Her eyes were full of concern, the way parents' eyes always are when they sense fear they can't explain. I tried to tell her, tried to describe what I had seen, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. It was someone or something, I stammered. In the woods, tall, made of bark, I don't know. She smiled weakly, thinking I was exaggerating, caught up in some childish fear. That smile did little to calm the gnawing terror I felt. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards in our farmhouse, every rustle from the wind outside sounded like it carried footsteps. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing what I thought were whispers drifting through the open window. They weren't real, I told myself, but somewhere deep in my chest, a cold knot of dread was forming. The next morning, I didn't speak a word of what I had seen. I didn't even tell my friends at school. But the feeling lingered, a pressure at the back of my eyes, a chill that made my hands tremble. It was Friday when I disappeared. I had gone into the woods again, under the pretense of retrieving a kite that had flown too far during recess. I told myself it was safe, that I was careful, that I would be back before the sun set. But as I walked deeper into the trees, the forest seemed to close in, the light dimming unnaturally fast. The ground became spongy under my feet, moss-covered roots wrapping around my ankles as if the forest itself was trying to stop me. I could hear something moving just beyond my line of sight, branches snapping softly but deliberately. The air grew colder, carrying the faint smell of smoke and bark, a scent I would remember forever. And then I saw him again. The tall figure. It didn't move toward me, not at first. It just stood there, watching. But something about the way it existed made me feel like the ground beneath me had lost its solidity. My instincts screamed, but fear and fascination held me frozen. Slowly, impossibly, it lifted one of its limbs, a branch-like arm, and pointed deeper into the woods. I don't know why, but I followed. I didn't run. Something, some voice in the back of my mind that I refused to acknowledge told me to go. The forest shifted around me. Paths I knew well twisted in impossible ways, loops forming that shouldn't exist. I called out for my mother, my friends, anyone. But only the wind answered. It carried with it a low hum, a vibration that pressed against my skull. I was tired, so tired, but I kept moving, driven by the figure's silent beckoning. I thought I saw shapes, figures, faces pressed into bark and shadow, but whenever I looked directly, they dissolved into the trees. Hours must have passed. I lost track of the sun, the time, and my own heartbeat. By nightfall, I had no idea where I was. The tall figure was still with me, always at the edge of my vision, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Hunger and thirst gnawed at me, but more pressing than physical needs was the suffocating psychological weight of the forest. Every step felt like I was moving through a dream that had gone wrong, a place where time and logic didn't apply. I began to feel like I was being tested, judged by the very earth beneath my feet. The third day was the worst. My body ached from exhaustion, my mouth dry, and my mind fraying. And then, when I thought I couldn't endure any longer, I saw a clearing ahead. Moonlight spilled across it, illuminating the outline of a small cabin I didn't recognize. The figure was gone, replaced by silence that pressed on me from all sides. I stumbled toward the cabin, and as I reached it, the door creaked open. Inside, the smell of damp wood and burning pine filled my nose, and I saw that the cabin wasn't abandoned. Small footprints led from the door to the far corner, where a tiny bundle of clothes had been left, as if waiting for me. And then I understood. Somehow, inexplicably, I had been led here. Not abducted, not harmed, just guided. The forest had let me go, and the figure of bark, impossibly tall and patient, watched from the edge of the trees as I stumbled out of the woods at dawn, back to my mother's frantic arms. When I finally spoke about it, people didn't believe me. An 11-year-old boy claiming he had followed a man made of bark into the wilderness? It sounded insane, and perhaps it was. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the way the forest had felt alive, the way shadows twisted unnaturally, the way the very air had held me in a grip that was both protective and terrifying. I didn't understand why it had happened, but I carried it with me, a warning and a lesson. The world is larger, stranger, and far more alive than we allow ourselves to believe. Even after I returned, the woods didn't feel like they had released me. I could see the edges of Tigart Valley from my bedroom window, the trees swaying as though breathing, their shadows stretching long into the night. Sleep came in fits and starts, and every creak of the farmhouse, every whistle of the wind, felt like a message from the forest. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way shadows lingered a beat too long, the way the temperature could shift in a single step from the warmth of the sunlit kitchen to a sudden cold that pressed into my bones. People said it was just my imagination, that children tend to remember things differently. But I could feel it, every day, the echo of that figure, watching, waiting, patient. School was no sanctuary. I would sit in class, pretending to write in my notebook, while my mind replayed the forest over and over. I couldn't talk about it. Words seemed useless. Who would understand that I had walked with something alive, something that felt neither human nor animal, and yet guided me, protected me in a way that terrified me more than any danger could? My friends tried to distract me, asking about baseball and comic books, but I could only nod, smile weakly, all the while feeling a tug in my chest, as if part of me had stayed behind in the shadows of those woods. It wasn't until the next summer that I realized the lessons the forest had forced upon me. I had grown quieter, more aware. Every time I walked near the tree line, I noticed patterns I had never seen before. The way certain trees leaned slightly, almost deliberately, or how the wind carried the calls of birds in sequences that felt like signals. I learned to listen in ways I hadn't before, to trust the small instincts my parents had always dismissed. And slowly, I understood that fear and intuition are not enemies, they are guides. The figure of bark had led me through a maze I could not have navigated alone, and in doing so, it had taught me to trust something deeper than sight, something older than reason. One evening, I wandered toward the edge of the forest, carrying a small flashlight. My parents, having given up worrying after days of normal life, resumed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of violet and red. That familiar knot of fear rose in my chest, the same that had gripped me in the forest 3 days before, but this time it was tempered by understanding. I paused, letting my senses stretch into the darkening woods, and there he was, at the very edge, a shape I could just barely recognize against the shadows, not threatening, not malevolent, but enormous, timeless, rooted to the forest itself. He didn't move, but I felt seen, and for the first time, unafraid. I spoke aloud, a whisper barely carrying over the rustle of leaves. I remember. It was true. I remembered every step, every smell, every sound that had guided me. And in the silence that followed, I understood the quiet truth. The forest was alive in a way humans could only sense if they opened themselves fully. There was wisdom here, older than houses or roads, older than the town itself. It was patience, it was discipline, it was a warning and a promise. The figure turned slightly, and though it had no face, I felt an acknowledgement, a kind of communion with something utterly alien and yet comforting. The following weeks, I began to explore differently, no longer with childish recklessness, but with respect. Every broken branch, every hidden path, every whispering stream became a teacher. I noticed how the forest seemed to respond to attention, how it shifted subtly under careful observation. And I realized that in those 3 terrifying days, I had been taught a skill I didn't yet have words for. How to move through life attuned to more than the obvious, how to hear the faint signals that others miss. It was also a lesson in courage, not the kind you see in movies with swords or fists, but the kind that makes you stand still when every instinct wants to flee, that makes you listen when all you want to shout. The forest tested me, but it did not break me. It gave me a chance to understand limits, boundaries, and the strange comfort that comes from embracing fear rather than running from it. I began to trust myself in ways I hadn't before, noticing the subtle clues the world offers when we pay attention. A pattern in the wind, a smell that shifts before rain, a shadow that lingers too long. But even as I grew, the memory haunted me. The town had moved on. People spoke in hushed tones about missing children, but I never heard another story quite like mine. My parents tried to reassure me, to put a rational frame around what had happened. But I knew better. Randolph County, with its deep ridges and secret hollows, is full of things we cannot name, places where the ordinary rules of time and logic bend. And sometimes when the light is just right, you can feel them watching, guiding, teaching, the way they had guided me. One day, much later, I returned to that same clearing, older now, nearly a man. The cabin was gone, as if it had never existed, but the air held the same weight, the same subtle hum that vibrated through your chest when something ancient brushes against you. I knelt on the mossy floor, letting my hands brush the damp earth, and whispered a quiet thanks, though no voice answered. It didn't need to. The lessons remained, etched into me, shaping who I was in ways I still recognize. Fear, I realized, is not something to conquer, but something to understand. The forest had not threatened me. It had shown me the limits of my understanding, and in doing so had expanded them. The figure of bark was not evil. It was an embodiment of the world's deeper truths, of the patience and persistence of life that watches, waits, and sometimes nudges you toward awareness. I left the clearing that day with a strange peace, a sense that I had passed a test I had never known I was taking. Now, decades later, I tell this story not to frighten, but to remind. There are places in this world that are older, stranger, and far more alive than we dare imagine. There are creatures, or energies, or presences that operate on a scale we cannot comprehend, and yet they interact with us in ways we cannot see. To survive, to grow, to truly live, we must learn to listen, to trust our instincts, and to confront fear without running. My encounter with the figure in Tigard Valley did not make me fearless. It made me aware, alive, and alert to the whispers of the world around me. I still walk near those forests even now. I feel the shadows in new ways, the air thick with quiet messages. Sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I can swear I hear a soft, deliberate knock on a distant tree, or the low rustle of leaves that feels like a beckon. And I remember the boy I once was, the small figure trembling at the edge of the tree line, facing a presence beyond comprehension, and I marvel at the courage it took to take that first step forward. Life, in its essence, is much like those woods. It is confusing, sometimes terrifying, full of twists and turns that defy reason, but it is also alive, patient, teaching if we only have the courage to notice. And the truth that Tigard Valley taught me, the hardest lesson, and the one I carry still, is that fear is not our enemy. Fear is the doorway, the teacher, the unseen hand guiding us toward understanding, resilience, and insight. And so, if you find yourself trembling in the dark, if the shadows seem too long and the silence too loud, remember, listen, trust, move carefully, but do not run blindly. There is something beyond what you see, a rhythm in the world, a pulse that waits for those willing to notice. I followed a man made of bark through the woods when I was 11, and I emerged changed. Not because I conquered him, not because I defeated the forest, but because I learned to walk with it, to acknowledge its presence, and to carry its lessons forward. Even now, I feel him in the woods. I don't fear him. I don't need to. And in that realization, I understand something profoundly human. Courage is not absence of fear. It is recognition, respect, and movement through the unknown with eyes wide open, heart steady, and mind awake. And perhaps that is the true gift of Tigard Valley, the knowledge that the world is larger, stranger, and infinitely more alive than we can comprehend, and that we can survive, even thrive, if we learn to see it clearly.